It had taken years of agonizing waiting for this to happen, but now everything had become much better in this town, and the residents and rulers joyfully celebrated this magnificent day. On this festive occasion, one of the ladies had an incredible desire for people to see how this place was flourishing and filled with life. The house of this beautiful lady still stood, and she always dreamed that people would one day witness the return of Alicia Melfont herself. The town had a comfortable, temperate climate and fertile lands, and the place was a prosperous estate in which every soul flourished. The estate was home to a renowned family, which had produced famous knights for centuries, and the heroine's parents were the most distinguished and celebrated aristocrats in the West. Her family was her pride and joy, and she also adored her brother and his wife, who was like a ray of warm sunshine to them. But the heroine forgot to mention the new family member, whom her father suddenly brought one fine morning and introduced to his family. Then the man said that from that moment on the girl would live with them, and no one could contradict his will. He brought into his family a little girl with golden hair named Ophelia, and this sweet girl possessed incredible divine powers. The main character was overjoyed to find a little sister and friend who would keep her company. And so it happened, sweet Ophelia became the best friend and beloved sister for the main character, surrounding everyone around with care and love. The life of the main character was wonderful, and it often seemed to her that the goddess Maera herself smiled at them and protected them from any unpleasant events. Alicia believed that happiness would last forever, and that no one would ever be able to destroy their strong family, and that they would be together for many years to come. Everything was great until dark clouds gathered over the family, and it all started with the arrival of that strange boy named Nyx. From the very beginning, he seemed incredibly suspicious to Alicia, and she felt that there was something very alarming and frightening in his gaze. However, the caring and happy Ophelia treated him with great kindness, and it was she who brought him into his house, despite Alicia's protest. Unfortunately, this was the only mistake of the Holy Virgin, and wherever Ophelia went, Nyx always followed her and did not leave her without attention for a minute. Despite the obvious signs, Alicia was so blinded by her dislike for the young man who had appeared in their family that she missed one very important point. Only after some time did it finally become clear to everyone that the reason for the obsession was not Ophelia, but her magical, divine power. And the stranger who unexpectedly arrived turned out to be not that nice young man at all, and he was hiding very terrible deeds in his plans. The young wanderer Nyx turned out to be a vicious priest who worshipped the dark deity Arpho, who wielded black magic. And Ophelia's divine power was disabled, but she would be able to awaken the dark deity from his slumber, and Nyx's goal was to extract Ophelia's divine power. But when it failed, it unleashed a hellish force on the estate where the family lived, and thousands of people were sacrificed in a magical blood ritual. But the most terrible thing that happened that night was that the main character's family died, and this stranger who had once burst into their lives was to blame for everything. Everything Alicia loved so much was taken away from her in the blink of an eye, and now Lady had to survive alone in this huge, cruel world. After that terrible night when the girl woke up, she found herself in a huge, empty estate with her little nephew Alfred. A shrill sound echoed through the estate, and baby Alfred was crying loudly, his little arms waving restlessly in the air, his chin rising and falling in silent despair. Suddenly, Alicia saw something shiny on the floor, and it turned out to be his father's ring, which he probably left or dropped there on purpose. That day, she swore and promised herself that she would definitely do everything possible to ensure that she and her nephew survived. Alicia then realized that she would have to rebuild the Melfont house from ruins, and when she restored the family name, Alfred, being her only relative, would take the title and continue the line. As for Ophelia, she clearly felt like she was the cause of a huge, terrible tragedy. She was the one who left her only sister to die all alone. Alicia couldn't say that burning hatred and resentment allowed her to become who she was. To achieve her goals, Alicia put aside her pride and went into business as a wine merchant, and through hard work restored the Melfont house in just 10 years. Everyone who saw the young lady always admired the size of her jewelry, realizing that it must cost a fortune. Most people envied Alicia, being sure that this witch had made a fortune selling wine and still dared to call herself an aristocrat. Hearing unpleasant speech behind her back, Alicia immediately turned to the young men to look into the eyes of those who gossiped behind her back. She laughed and asked the young men to come to Ramdak when they had free time. since their jewelry was intended for the imperial family, but she decided that she would let the scoundrels have a glimpse of the luxury. The lady admitted that she was sure that the young people would not have enough money to buy them, but at least they could get closer to the aristocrats. Alicia knew perfectly well that they were only capable of gossiping behind your back, but they couldn't say a word to your face. Alicia's aristocratic credentials meant nothing to her, and after all, she had been paving the way for her dear nephew Alfred until he could govern on his own. While walking around the city, Alicia noticed that fireworks were a waste of money, and the government needed to reconsider how they were wasting local residents' taxes. But suddenly, in the very center of the city, there was a loud bang, and the girl only managed to see huge clouds of smoke. Alicia realized that it was probably an explosion, and there was no time to waste, because she needed to get out of here as quickly as possible to save her life. As soon as she was about to leave, the heroine felt a strange feeling that had never let her down, and listening to her intuition, the girl turned around and saw a young man whom she'd already seen once. It was that same Nyx, and it seemed he had appeared specifically to finally talk to Alicia, whom he had been looking for so long. The young man laughed and said, could it be that she had survived after all, and was clearly a real stubborn woman, since she was able to achieve success despite her dire situation? Alicia always knew that Nyx was cursed, stating that she couldn't say the same about him, having heard that the archers sealed him away the same day he killed her people. But it seems that he managed to slip away like a petty stalker that day, and Alicia always dreamed that the young man would safely rot in the dungeon. Nyx laughed, answering, Alicia still sharp-tongued, and asked where the girl hid something. He asked where Ophelia was, and Alicia immediately thought he was a sick bastard, because just when she thought things couldn't get any worse, this scoundrel immediately remembered Ophelia. The heroine needed to figure out how to delay Nyx until the priests arrived, and the girl angrily asked if the young man really didn't understand anything at all. She told him loudly that Lady Ophelia had died tragically on that fateful day, and Nyx probably should have known about it. Nyx immediately fell silent, and the girl wondered if her words and actions had just worked, and that he would finally leave her alone. But the young man laughed maliciously in response, being sure that all the girl's words were a complete lie, and that she was behaving in a completely inappropriate manner. His thoughts wandered around only one idea to deal with Alicia, the girl who seemed to hinder him at every step. Nyx knew he had the power to hit Alicia, and the plan was brewing in his head like a poisonous flower blooming in the darkness. He began to chant spells with age-old secrets, and black shadows began to swirl around him, taking the form of an evil spirit awakened by a thirst for revenge. And Alicia's life was again in danger because of that same Ophelia, because of whom the whole family had already suffered. In the dark dungeon, quiet voices were heard, and someone asked to keep an eye on the captured girl and wait for an order from Mr. Nyx. The girl slowly opened her eyes, and the first thought that flashed through her head was where she was, and what would happen to her next. Alicia felt she couldn't die here because she had baby Alfred and the wine business to take care of. Therefore, she tried with all her might to come to her senses, and was sure that many people were waiting for her return and were really hoping for help. There was a strange sound all around, the rustling of wings. Alicia turned her head and saw bats fluttering aimlessly through the stale air. The darkness consumed her, but the desire to survive forced Alicia to focus. She remembered that the villain Nyx was hunting her, but she had no idea how she ended up here. The heroine saw that she was standing in a glowing lake, and every movement required effort, but Alicia knew that this darkness could not hold her forever. She tried to remember what exactly had happened, but all she could remember was that she must have blacked out and lost consciousness. The lady looked around, and her attention was drawn to one unusual object from which a magical light emanated. Suddenly, the heroine noticed a book in the distance, around which purple lotuses were floating, and its very appearance in the middle of the water was incredibly mysterious. The girl was surprised, because it was the first time she saw a book floating in a pond, and she had no idea what could happen to it next. The book was a novel called Ophelia's Night, and Alicia could tell with certainty that it was definitely not a fun and exciting story. After all, it was in this book that the story of her entire life was described, and Alicia, seeing the first page, could not believe her eyes. With each page turned, the book revealed the terrible truth about the events that had taken place that week itself. that fateful night when Nyx had deprived her of her beloved family, and that night had indeed been the most terrible in the heroine's life, when Nyx had brought death and decay upon the Melfont estate. It described how one day Ophelia, not wasting time, hurried to help little Alfred, and fortunately for her, she arrived just in time. She headed straight for her sister Alice, but when she reached her, the girl's life force had already been given without return to the Dark Devil. Alicia's memories of the past were still vague, but the girl understood that lost memories and forgotten feelings were gradually returning to her. She read how a demonic hand grabbed her, and for a few seconds she stopped breathing, lost her remaining strength, and then actually died. Ophelia, meanwhile, used most of her powers to bring Alicia's dead body back to life. She had distributed her forces wisely, and she still had very little time left to fully deal with the horror that had happened to her family due to Nyx's fault. She used a magic spell and sealed the fallen priest, and when the Dark Lord's messenger was defeated, it turned out that the world had finally found its long-awaited peace again. However, 10 years later, Nyx's remaining followers devised a way to free him from his chains and the servant, and the darkness once again awakened from its long slumber. And after that, once again, Nyx went in search of Ophelia, and this means that he came to the capital because he felt a magical power nearby. This explained a lot about why Nyx was so resigned to asking about Ophelia, and Alicia knew that if she could somehow use her power, she would deal him a serious blow. But Alicia had no idea how to do this, so she decided she needed to continue reading the book, and perhaps there would be more necessary clues further on. Having crushed the Imperial forces, Nyx went to the far corner of the kingdom, where he built the real citadel of Tantaros. He then tried to lure Ophelia into his lair by sending Alicia to her in small pieces. And when Ophelia responded to such a dark invitation, she finally realized that she had been wrong to get involved with the ruthless, bloodthirsty Nyx. He was sure that it was the desperate desire to live that had brought the Holy Virgin here, and that Alicia Milfont was the only one to blame. Then he killed the girl right in front of Ophelia's eyes, and her world collapsed at that moment, and only she was to blame for what happened, having once accepted the villain Nyx into her family. Alicia wondered if this meant that she was destined to die, and that the girl had no chance at all for a normal, peaceful life. She was outraged and did not agree with the story of the book, because Ophelia gave her her divine power, and she could not just go and die. As soon as Nyx's blade cut through Alicia's flesh, the divine power that had kept her alive for 10 years returned to its mistress. And at that moment, divine power endowed Ophelia with even greater strength of spirit, body, and mind. Ophelia understood perfectly well that she had to survive again and send Nyx back where he belonged. Armed with divine power and anger, this time Ophelia sealed the fallen priest forever, preventing the return of the Dark Lord Arfo. Thus ended the story of the film. Mayera's favorite and the savior of humanity, and this girl had a special destiny. Ignoring her fear, Alicia continued reading the book, her heart beating in unison with the rhythm of the barely perceptible hope of salvation. She continued reading the book, but still did not agree with it, convincing herself that it was just a bad dream that would soon end and disappear forever. The girl grabbed her hair and wanted to wake up from this terrible nightmare, because little Alfred was still waiting for her, and she was incredibly needed by all the people of Milfont. She was ready to fight any fears that lurked in this dark place and do everything possible to regain her freedom. Alicia still thought it was a dream and slapped her hands against her face to try to wake up and find herself in the world she had been in before. But unfortunately, nothing worked for the girl, and heavy iron shackles jingled on her fragile wrists, not allowing her to escape from this pitch-black horror. She realized that she was most likely in a fortress, built in a remote and wild wasteland far from the Imperial troops. The people who put Alicia here also keep other prisoners here as sacrifices to the dark deity, and the girl heard the screams of people and pleas for help coming from other dungeons. She suddenly heard the voice of Nyx, who asked the deity Arfo to accept and guide the souls of people into the depths of hell. Nyx's twisted speeches only make things worse, and the girl realized that she was in the very lair of Tantaros. The lady sighed and even found everything that had happened to her funny, because now she knew perfectly well that everything was going according to the written plot of the book. The girl's emotions were mixed with panic and horror from the fact that she understood that she probably wouldn't be able to get out of these lattice walls without help. And at that moment, Alicia thought bitterly, Was she really destined to die here? Because the plot of the book is unchangeable, and everything that is destined there goes on as usual. Alicia stared into the distance beyond the dark bars, but she believed that she couldn't give up, because there had to be some way out. If the book was true, Ophelia's divine power was flowing through Alicia's veins right now, and this thought haunted the girl. Alicia knew that once she figured out how to use it, escaping would be a breeze. And she could probably use the magical power to finally punch that bastard Nyx and make him pay for becoming her family and the Melfont home. Suddenly, she heard voices approaching her in the dungeon, talking about some girl, and most likely, they were talking about a new captive. She looked closely at her hands and tried to figure out how Ophelia had used her magical powers to overcome such overwhelming difficulties. The girl knew she had to do something soon before she was captured, and she put her hands to her chest and prayed for Ophelia to finally help her. The young men, slowly walking along the dark corridor, were inspired that the Lord of Hell would finally set foot on Earth and probably answer the prayers of Mr. Nyx. They opened the girl's prison and were going to bring her to the master, because one should never make him wait long. They asked Alicia to come out of the dungeon, but to their surprise, the girl did not move at all and sat in place, even seeing the open door. The light around her grew stronger, and finally the shackles cracked and fell apart like ribbons, and Alicia let out a sigh of relief as she felt freedom once again within her grasp. In that dungeon, she found a strength she didn't know she had, and with that strength she was ready to face Nyx. With courage in her heart and magic in her hands, the brave Lady Alicia was ready for a new fight. She controlled the magical power with skill, and it was incredible. And it turns out that everything was true. And all this time, a huge magical power really was sleeping inside her. The writer who had wasted paper on Ophelia's night had probably been mistaken in thinking that Alicia would meet such a miserable end, and she was sure that no amount of ink or paper would save his book from the chaos she was about to wreak here. She knew there were trials ahead, but now her spirit was as free as her body. The heroine felt her soul filling with energy, and opening her eyes, she saw how a light aura of light began to sparkle around her hands. It was really quite impressive how she dealt with the guards, because the lady flew through all the floors in just one fall, without receiving any injuries. But now the girl needed to focus on getting out of here safe and sound, because little Alfred was still waiting for her. Suddenly, the young men saw the fugitive. They immediately realized that the lady was a captive and chased after her. One of the prison guards managed to grab the girl by the hem of her dress, and Alicia stumbled and fell to the ground with a crash. The lady tore off the hem of the hated dress, indignant that she should have cut it off long ago or not worn it at all, because the red color is nothing but trouble. Turning around, the heroine saw that the young men were still chasing her, but for some reason, they could not get through the invisible door, and it looked incredibly funny. It seemed like her magical power had created a barrier to keep the hated bastards away, and those pieces of cloth that were left in their hands would be the only thing they would get from the brave Alicia. The light flashed, and before the bandits could even figure out what was happening, they were surrounded by a bright glow that would have scared anyone. Doubts and fears retreated. Alicia straightened her shoulders and took a deep breath. She used her magic not only for protection, but also to gain confidence in her abilities. Ophelia's power saved her again, but Alicia did not want to thank her this time, because she harbored a great grudge against the girl. The guards were still standing behind the invisible back, and the lady wondered why they wanted to become servants of darkness, since it seemed their master was not going to share his powers with anyone. She shouted, "Their dark lord is not powerful at all," and the young men were sure that their master would one day punish this stupid girl. Alicia had finally gotten rid of the chase, and now she didn't understand how she had used the magical power, without having the slightest idea how to do it. She hated to realize this, but the only way to escape from here was to use the information she had received from the novel she had read earlier. Everything happens according to the plot of the books, and according to it, at the end of this tunnel, there is a source, which is a prison for a knight who is capable of destroying the world with his power, and his name is Norman Diaz. In the original, Ophelia used magical power, which immediately returned after Alicia's death. She used it to free the knight from his water prison, and the book described every detail of the event. Now the heroine wanted to get ahead of her and use the young man for her escape, because she understood perfectly well that he would definitely be able to help her. With the bandits on the run, she was ready to continue her journey to freedom, knowing that her unique abilities would always be her greatest weapon. Alicia looked around but saw no pond or spring that could accommodate a grown man. She peered into the void and didn't notice how she stepped into a huge puddle, and splashes of water flew in all directions. Finally, she saw that very source, illuminated by the moonlight, and it was exactly the place from the book in which the young man was imprisoned. It was the same source of imprisonment, but the lady laughed because it looked more like a puddle after rain and not a magical source. Alicia decided that she should definitely take a closer look at the magical source in order to specifically figure out how to save the young man who was in captivity. Alicia took off her red shoes and walked almost ankle-deep into the water, but the cold lake turned out to be deeper than it looked. Her determination was stronger than her fear, and she dove into the lake, where every drop of water embraced her like vulnerable matter, familiar and close to her. The depths of the lake revealed their secrets, and soon she found herself in an underwater cave covered in magical light. The very next second, the girl realized, she should have guessed, this was probably a cunning trap that she had fallen into. The water's surface enveloped the girl, and suddenly she felt that her hand touched the hand of another person. In the center of the lake, a young man was floating. His eyes were closed, and his face was incredibly pale, like moonlight. However, the lake was probably guarded by magic, and in order to free the young man, the heroine would need magical power. This young man's name was Knight Norman Diaz, and the girl recognized him at first sight. Alicia couldn't take her eyes off the young man's sweet face, considering Nick's a real pervert, because he obviously kept Norman here solely because of his excellent appearance. And this was the first time the heroine saw such a beautiful person that she completely stopped understanding where she was and what she had to do. Alicia looked closely at the young man's face, and he was still so young, as if time had stood still for him here forever. And this time froze at the very moment when the young man was cruelly cursed, not giving even the slightest chance of salvation. The moment Alicia first saw him, she forgot all her plans for him and only realized that she was acting on pure instincts without giving account to logical reasoning. She bravely grabbed the young man by the jacket, realizing that first she needed to free him and everything else could be dealt with later. The heroine gathered all her strength and carefully pulled the young man out of the water, realizing that she needed to seriously work on her endurance, because she would not be able to save anyone if she was out of breath after every short swim. The young man was bound by a magical spell that pierced every cell of his body and soul for many years of imprisonment. Alicia looked carefully again at the young man who had not regained consciousness, fearing that he might probably die. But leaning closer, she felt that the young man was breathing, and in this form he looked like a sleeping princess under an ominous spell. Alicia called the young man by name and introduced herself, saying that she really needed the young man's help and that he should wake up right now, because she understood perfectly well that they couldn't stay in this cave for long. But the young man did not come to his senses, and Alicia, starting to speak quite loudly, began to shake his body so that he would quickly wake up before the crazy demon lover found her. However, an unknown shadow hung over her, and although she did not yet realize it, almost instantly her feelings faded into the background. Raising her head, Alicia saw a figure emerge from the shadows. It was Nyx, the villain who brought fear and destruction, risen from the depths of darkness. And right now he wanted to know where the damned Alicia was hiding Ophelia, whom he really needed. The heroine insisted that Ophelia had been dead for a long time and that Nyx had probably forgotten or did not understand at all what she was saying. Alicia felt a shiver run down her spine at his presence, and she mustered all her courage to meet his gaze. The young man screamed that Alicia was lying because he clearly felt her power flowing through the veins of the girl, who for some reason decided that she could figure everything out herself. The young man placed his hand on the lady's shoulder, and at that moment Alicia realized how cruel and inhuman his thoughts were. He must have felt Ophelia's power as soon as he touched the girl's shoulder when she activated it to get here. Magic was awakening in every cell of her body, and the light around her was growing, as if responding to her desires. Nyx's evil smile spread more and more across his face, and all of nature was preparing for the coming battle. But suddenly the young man turned his attention to someone else. He saw Norman Diaz lying on the shore of the lake, so he immediately asked how the girl managed to free him because he was under the influence of a strong curse. He was sure Alicia couldn't have done it, and then it was definitely Ophelia who came here to free Norman. At that moment, the girl cleverly took advantage of the opportunity and hit the young man in the face with all her might, so much so that he was left speechless. The sound of the bang came like thunder on a clear day, and Nick stepped back, stunned, his angry face changing, laughter quickly replacing the anger, and genuine surprise appeared in his eyes. The girl screamed loudly. Probably the young man needs exactly this divine power, which he so persistently dreams of and wants to take. Alicia said that in order to seal Nyx, Ophelia used the rest of her powers, and after that she decided to resurrect one of her family members, and it was her. And finally, the villain now knew that from that moment on, the girl was the keeper of Ophelia's magical power, and this meant that he would never be able to take her away again. Nyx, still unable to recover from the surprise, looked at her hand from which the light emanated, and driven by anger began to plunge his body into darkness again. He couldn't believe that the girl had actually taken away the great, powerful power that he had been obsessed with and searching for many years. Now finally, Nyx knew the feeling of loss and hopelessness, and the girl had long since gone through this thanks to Nyx's atrocities, and now it was his turn. Nixie was exhausted with rage and anger because he was sure that Ophelia's power was not intended for such inferior people as the girl standing in front of him. Alicia laughed out loud, finding the young man's feelings incredibly pathetic, since he wouldn't even be able to kill her now, even if he really wanted to. Otherwise, he could say goodbye to the precious power he so covets, because if the girl dies, the source of energy will also go out without the right to be reborn. The young man did not want to believe the heroine's words because Ophelia was chosen and could not simply die, having used her magical power so uselessly. Nyx looked confused, his evil plan suddenly losing its power, and all beliefs about his unlimited power and control began to crumble before her determination. Alicia took another step forward, her determination burning like a bright flame, ready to ignite all the darkness around her. Nyx's evil smile turned to hatred, but she was ready to fight his cunning, realizing that her inner strength was much stronger than the darkness he imposed. Suddenly, a voice was heard above the girl's head, telling Nyx to finish her off, and thus Ophelia would be able to return again. It was the voice of a dark deity, and everyone clearly heard that he had just ordered the death of the hated girl who was interfering with the fulfillment of his cruel plans. Nyx understood that he only needed to quickly finish off the girl so that everything would return to normal and he could once again become the owner of great powerful force. The young man grabbed Alicia by the throat. I wish that the precious energy would flow out of her. I prove that the vile girl is unworthy of her. But Nyx only smiled, seeing her struggle, and his dark magic continued to squeeze the girl in his arms, and the feeling of loss of strength engulfed her. Alicia felt darkness envelop her entire body, but a light flashed in her mind, and she looked at the young man she had saved and suddenly remembered all those who had trusted her. She didn't want to die so absurdly, and somewhere deep inside she believed that Norman would still wake up at that second to save her life. The ominous shadows that were enveloping the heroine from all sides began to weaken, and Nyx, feeling himself losing control, recoiled. Suddenly, Nyx flew to the side as if he had been electrocuted, and Alicia, taking her first breath of air, had absolutely no idea what had just happened. Suddenly, a light flashed around, and with it came hope for salvation in the person of Norman, who had just woken up. Instead of fear, Norman felt a surge of power, and magic sparked around him like lightning in the darkness. Norman used a magical sacred barrier, and now the girl understood why Nyx was thrown aside with such force. A stream of light hit the villain as he cast the spell, and he was thrown back, causing the dark entity to crack and disintegrate. A smile appeared on the villain's face, and he whispered that Alicia Melfont should come to him immediately. She heard Nyx's voice in her head, assuring her that she would never escape, and that no matter where she went, she would definitely return to him. Brave Alicia did not want to fall into the hands of the villain anymore, so she shouted loudly for Nyx to leave her alone forever and never come near her again. The young man loudly replied that he was supposedly giving the girl a chance to sacrifice her unclean flesh to a dark deity, claiming that this was the only option in which she could stay alive. All this time, Nyx was chasing Alicia's body, wanting to get her magical power. and the lady hated him incredibly for his cruelty and insidious deception. She told Norman that this man had tried to harm her, and it was this fallen priest who had killed the people in the Melfont estate and sacrificed them to the dark deity Arfo. Alicia argued that Nyx could not be left alive because he would come again and try to carry out his evil intent and kill everyone in his path. The girl confessed that she was indeed a daughter of the Melfont house, but now she was the head and the only survivor, so she didn't have much of a choice. The green energy around Nyx shimmered like toxic smoke, and even the nature around him seemed oppressed, as if the palette of kindness had lost its colors. The villain had almost broken the barrier, and now the girl only asked the young man not to let Nyx kill her under any circumstances. Alicia felt fear creep into her heart, but she was not going to give in. Norman took the girl by the hand and said that he was very ashamed to admit it, but right now he did not have enough strength to cope with the dark power of Nyx. However, Norman promised to buy at least a little time so that the two of them could finally escape the clutches of the cruel villain who had harmed so many people. Nyx stepped closer, a wave of green light crashed down on Alicia, and she felt the cold penetrate her, trying to suppress her inner strength. But in that moment, a fire of determination flared up inside her. The villain screamed at Norman to surrender, because this flimsy magical barrier would not be able to save him, and the villain would tear him apart, presenting him as a gift to the dark deity. Nyx laughed even louder, but there was now a slight note of concern in his voice, as he clearly hadn't expected Alicia to be so resilient. The battle between darkness and light took place in front of the magical lake, and at that moment, Alicia knew that she would never give up until she achieved final victory over Nyx and his sinister intentions. Nyx, realizing his control over the darkness was weakening, sneered, fear flashing in his eyes. A moment later, a sparkling stream of light erupted, crashing down on the villain, and he screamed, his green aura beginning to crack like glass. Norman was a holy knight with the power to disrupt the balance of the entire world, and this young man was incredibly strong and had magical abilities. This fair-haired man was one of the heroes of the novel who prophesied Alicia's death, and she read about it in that very magic book on the lake. He simultaneously reminded her of the danger that awaited her in the future, but at the same time, he was her only salvation. The young man covered the girl with his hand, saying that they needed to leave this place as quickly as possible because it was completely unclear what Nyx might do next. The villain lay on the damp ground, exhausted and broken, but still insisted that Alicia had no need to be stubborn. And doesn't she see that everything she does is completely useless, because deep down she knows that she is simply condemning herself to further suffering. He kept repeating that no matter what the girl did, death would still come for her, but the heroine, clutching her head, screamed that this was not true, because she did not want to just sit and wait for her death. She knew that she was definitely not an ordinary temporary vessel for Ophelia's divine power, and that her mission was completely different. Norman noticed the girl's strange behavior and asked if she could hear his voice in her head, because the villain Nyx was trying to weaken her by instilling fear in the girl's soul, and she needed to gather her strength and resist right now. He tried to convince her that she could handle everything, and in the end, Alicia was the hero who saved him from his long imprisonment in the lake. Therefore, he was sure that the girl was able to survive all this and cope with the dark forces and the atrocities of Nyx. The young man asked to forgive him for his rudeness, knowing full well that they needed to hurry and leave this cave immediately. Alicia and Norman, full of hope and strength, did not retreat, burning in the fight for what was dear to them. Every step they took brought them closer to the final victory, to the dream for which they fought. Norman held Alicia in his arms, and they both knew that together they could defeat even the darkest force and prevent the villain from taking their souls to the depths of hell. Ophelia remembered how long she had struggled with a dark dream in which everything seemed unclear and vague, as if she were floating in an endless sea of gray clouds. Then Ophelia woke up in a field, and knights ran up to her to check on the girl's condition. One of the young men was named Nicholas Diaz, and he was the second son of the Diaz house. So as soon as he saw that the girl had woken up, he immediately ran up to ask how she was feeling. Ophelia asked excitedly how long she had been unconscious and how many days had passed since the festival, from which she remembered nothing. Nicholas asked the girl not to worry, because less than a day had passed and Nyx had not received what he came for. And they still have enough time before he kills Alicia to save her life. Ophelia had passed out when she was needed most and felt incredibly pathetic, but the boy insisted they had enough leads to find Nyx. They still didn't know where the villain was hiding, but the girl believed that they didn't have time for this and that they needed to set out urgently. Ophelia took the sword in her hands and said that they were heading straight to Tantaros so that she could deal with the villain Nyx and destroy the dark force. No one knew where Tantaros was, and the other knights had never heard the name before. Ophelia couldn't explain everything, but the name and location of this citadel suddenly appeared in her head, and they had to go there immediately. Ophelia's instincts are never wrong, and if this Tantaros is indeed Nyx's base, that's probably where he'll be able to find more clues about Norman's location. Who knows, maybe Norman was expecting him, so the captain urgently asked Jack to prepare for departure. The wind stirred her hair, and Alicia felt freedom enter her heart as she flew next to Norman, the Knight of Light. Looking around and experiencing the first sensation of flight, Alicia thought for sure that she was definitely dreaming, and that all this could not really be happening. Alicia felt a stream of light coming from Norman protecting them, and the young man carefully asked her to close her eyes. Alicia felt awkward because she was too close to Norman, and the next second the young man landed neatly on the ground in the forest. As soon as the girl recovered a little from the flight, the young man immediately asked if she was injured. At this moment, the heroine really thought about the rapid events that had occurred in such a short period of time. She realized that she had been so focused on surviving that she had completely forgotten how Nyx had attacked her with evil powers. And with great regret, she remembered that this monster in the form of Nyx 5 had ruined everything, just like many years ago. She barely had time to realize what was happening before her breathing became heavy, like leaden clouds hanging over her head. Alicia tried to take a deep breath, but her lungs felt like they were filled with heavy clouds, and every gulp felt like fighting a whirlpool. She bit her lip, trying to pull herself together, but darkness began to loom over the edges of her consciousness. She was very afraid that she could suddenly die like this because of the dark force, and only heard Norman's voice, who asked the girl to pull herself together. His warm gaze created a protective circle around her, and strength and confidence shone through it like an eternal light. He realized that Alicia was suffocating from the shock she had suffered, so he quickly hugged the girl by the shoulders, promising that he would not let her die here. He apologized if she thought it was inappropriate, but his next actions really did require a prior apology. He carefully untied Alicia's corset so that she could finally take a deep breath, because the clothes were incredibly restricting her breathing. Each new breath became a little easier, although fear still tried to hold her in its embrace. Alicia nodded, her hair flying in the wind, but she could clearly feel Norman's light penetrating her soul, filling her with hope. The lady did not immediately realize that she was still alive, and it seems that the course of events really changed, and this time, Nyx did not manage to kill her. She admitted that she was incredibly scared, but she got out of there alive, and was able to do so only thanks to a young man. Alicia leaned against Norman's chest with tears in her eyes. Feeling completely safe now, she knew she couldn't run away from death forever, and now it remained to find out if Alicia could avoid the tragic end that was destined for her. Over time, everything in the citadel of Tantaros was in ruins, and the people who arrived there had no idea what had happened there. The captain was informed that the knights had found one priest, and he was lying under the beams, so it was necessary to urgently send for the priests from the temple and seal the dark forces as quickly as possible. The captain asked to show the way, because they needed to complete an important mission in time so that the dark forces would not break out. When Nyx was finally sealed, everyone would be able to find out what really happened on that fateful day. But the captain had a distinct feeling that something had changed. Norman sat by the flickering fire in the silence of the forest, the fire crackling and casting warm golden light on his face. He thought the world had not changed at all while he was imprisoned in the magical lake. Norman tried to remain calm, but anxiety did not leave him, and nearby, on the soft grass, Alicia was sleeping comfortably. Her face was pale and her eyes, full of fatigue, were closed, and Norman understood that the last battle and its consequences had exhausted the girl both physically and emotionally. He whispered that everything would definitely be fine, and so much had happened in this huge world while he was sleeping. Norman found it difficult to imagine how much people had suffered at the hands of the villain, and he was sure that he alone was to blame for what had happened to many people. Once upon a time he met a young man, a meeting with whom later changed his fate. Then he revealed his name to the fallen paladin, a comrade, and another friend with whom he had gone through many hardships. And he truly always believed in him and considered him a brother. For Norman, this young man was truly a member of the family, and their first meeting was not accidental. However, even though they fought together as the great heroes of the Empire, in one moment everything changed. And after that, Norman could no longer believe in people. One day, the most precious person he considered a friend grabbed his brother and wanted to disperse the soul of his enemy named Norman Diaz Zoe. Norman was blind and never saw the hatred that was hidden in the depths of his heart, and only later did he manage to understand all the cruelty that the young man had been hiding deep inside all these years. Using what Norman told him, Iago cast an ancient curse that required the victim's true name. Norman asked Iago not to do this under any circumstances, because a curse always costs the caster dearly, and he should know this very well. The young man confessed that he had hated Norman all his life, from the very first time they met, and at that moment Norman felt his heart shatter into tiny pieces from cruelty, lies, and deceit. Iago claimed that everything would be fine without Norman. His life would improve if his friend did not run ahead of everyone else. His true nature was revealed after many years of false friendship, and Norman understood that now he must stand against not only the dark deity, but also his former friend. Iago still held the boy, threatening to kill him, and as it turned out, all this time he was next to Norman not because of friendship, but in order to watch him weaken, being just a pawn in this crazy world. If Nicholas had not awakened the divine power and stopped the curse, Norman's flesh would have turned to dust, and his wounded soul would leave this world forever and never return back. And after everything that happened, Norman would find himself in the bottomless darkness of the curse, where everyone would want him to disappear, or even better, just die. Norman's mind was constantly filled with thoughts that his fake friend had actually hated him from their very first meeting, and it was incredibly painful for him to realize this. He was sure that everything would be fine without him, and so he no longer fought, but only helplessly awaited his end, so that he could finally leave this world forever. All this time, the young man was sure that he wanted to die, until he heard the voice of a girl in the dark abyss, which helped him return back. And now that same girl, the voice that helped Norman return to life, lay right in front of him in the wild, dense forest. Alicia was fast asleep, muttering something under her breath while Norman looked with special attention at the face of the beautiful girl who had saved his life. At the moment when she encountered the devilish power, her heart was full of determination. But now that determination was exhausted, and an unconscious fatigue took hold of her. Norman's hand gently touched her forehead, and he felt the warmth of her skin. She was still in this world, safe, but she looked so fragile. He immediately felt that the girl's head was hot, and Alicia might probably develop a fever. Norman looked at his hands and knew he shouldn't rely too much on that power. But he also knew he had absolutely no other choice, and right now he needed to bring Alicia to her senses so that the girl would stay alive. In the silence of the night, he only prayed that her spirit would remain as bright as the light they protected. He saw that Alicia was getting worse with every minute, because she pulled him out of the lake with such wounds. It was probably the fear of death that gave her so much strength to continue on her way and move on. The firelight was reflected in his eyes, and he knew that even if they had won, there were still difficulties ahead. But now, during this silence, he was grateful to fate that Lady Julia was alive and next to him, and Norman had never seen such an incredibly strong will to live, and now he was interested in what kind of person Alicia was. He wanted to know more about her when she woke up, and this thought did not leave the young master's head, and he did not even remember the last time he was so excited about tomorrow. Everything that happened was possible thanks to Alicia's sacrifice and the predetermined plot scenario. Lady Alicia slowly opened her eyes, and her surroundings began to become clear in the soft light of early morning. She looked at her hands, which were shaking incredibly hard, and realized that she had not died last night and was still alive. The girl felt the softness of the bed embrace her, like a shelter after a long journey and difficult trials. She tried to remember what happened, but she only remembered the escape from Tantaros, and everything else was like a fog. The heroine tried to remember again, but it was as if there were no memories of yesterday in her head. The lady raised her head and looked around. She was in a cozy room furnished with good taste, and at that moment the door opened and Norman found her with a basket of apples. But the young man who had just come out into the hut seemed completely unfamiliar, and she was seeing him for the first time. So the girl became frightened and screamed loudly. As soon as she woke up, she immediately grabbed the first man she came across, trying to prove to him that he was a dark servant of Nyx and was trying to deceive her. Norman asked the girl to calm down, because these kind people allowed them to stay here for free and spend the night in their cozy, warm house. To Alicia, it all sounded suspicious, and she didn't understand why strangers would do this without any benefit. The man did not pay attention to the behavior of the capricious lady, who was loudly nervous, and thanked the old man for his understanding, assuring him that this warlike lady had been through a lot. The young man was left alone with the girl, asking probably everything that was happening was unclear to her, and Alicia did not understand at all where she was. Norman thought she would wake up a little later, and he needed to come back earlier and explain everything to avoid a similar situation. But in any case, he was very glad to see a girl standing on her feet, talking and smiling. Alicia looked at her hands and was scared. All her wounds had healed, and somehow she had recovered very quickly. She was sure that there was divine power at work here, but Norman didn't answer and just smiled silently. He said that Alicia must be hungry and handed the girl a red juicy apple, grinning that it was definitely not poisoned. The lady took the apple in her hands and felt that Norman simply wanted to take care of her and that she should behave more kindly and restrained. She asked who had changed her clothes while she was unconscious, and the young man said that an elderly lady had changed her clothes, as the girl's dress was wet and dirty. Alicia also wanted to know how much time had passed since their escape, where exactly they were, because this was very important, and also what happened to Nyx after the destruction of Tantaros. Norman asked who Nyx was, and the lady told him that he was the skinny priest who had fought them just recently, and that was his real name. Norman realized that the girl meant that villain, and thought for a moment, looking at the front door. Nyx took the full brunt of the divine power and will likely be paralyzed for weeks or more. The young man scolded himself for the fact that he had disgraced himself incredibly and was unable to deal with him when he had a great chance. But unfortunately, the long imprisonment had taken away a lot of his vital and magical powers. Alicia didn't understand how Norman could say such things with such a sweet smile, and the young man told her that she fell asleep and slept for about 2 days after escaping from the citadel, but the girl was sure that she had lost consciousness. He carried her through the forest when they came across this village, and he thought they called this place Thula. It was a village on the border of the Empire and the East Coast, and it wasn't that far from the Romdak Guild headquarters. Norman said that he had long wanted to ask Alicia one question that had been tormenting him since their very first meeting. He was very interested in how Alicia knew about the imprisonment in that lake, because absolutely no one knew about it except him and the villain who cast the spell. Norman really couldn't understand, because she certainly couldn't know that he had been imprisoned there many years ago. Oddly enough, this girl became his savior, but he still didn't even know her name or the reason for his salvation. Alicia couldn't say that she read about the young master in a book. She just heard that he was the firstborn of the Diaz house and had gone missing a long time ago. And when she found him sealed in the lake, her intuition told her that he was the same young man. He asked if the lady knew why Nyx had kidnapped him and sealed him with a powerful spell for many years. Alicia didn't immediately understand what to answer to such a question, and only silently continued to look at the young man, holding a juicy apple in her hand. The girl said that Nyx's goal is to become a follower of the dark deity Arpho, and for this he is ready to do anything, even if a huge number of people suffer. Thousands of years ago, the dark deity Arpho unleashed the 7 deadly sins upon the world, and from that moment on, a huge number of people perished. People began to kill each other with the help of acquired dark forces, and no one could stop this madness and chaos. Seeing the deaths of her beloved children, the goddess of life and creator of the world, breathing in her divine power, defeated the demon and sealed him for many centuries. The goddess then imprisoned Arpho in the pages of a secret tome so that she would forever erase them from the memories of her children, and the people placed it in a deep temple to hide it until the end of time. Nyx, endowed with divine power, decided to follow his evil thoughts and ignore the people around him. The young man was able to find this forbidden tome quite easily, and once he learned of its location, he immediately got to it in no time. He wanted all people to release their hatred and start cursing their enemies, and he was confident that he could create a dark army. Nyx believed that the path of darkness was the only one that led to true liberation of soul and body, and every one of his followers believed his words. The cursed magic and the control it gave over others was too sweet a temptation for priests like Nyx, who always sought the Almighty. After defeating Norman, he locked the paladin inside his head as a trophy to commemorate his first act as Arfo's new servant. Alicia, as always, considered herself a very honest person, but for some reason now she could not utter a word. And she couldn't even tell Norman the truth to his face, that he was just a living trophy of a cruel and bloodthirsty demon who had imprisoned him with a magic spell. She said that using divine power, Nyx sealed Norman and his curse and then went to Melfont Manor, and it was not a lie at all. It was just an untold backstory that she knew from the novel she read, and that was until he sacrificed the people of the estate, after which he was given the power of darkness, and that was a scary story that Alicia didn't want to know at all. The heroine said that in the end, Nyx was defeated by Ophelia, but was later resurrected by followers who could not leave the master's work and happily continued it. The first thing he did after his return was to kidnap the girl. The young man was very sorry about the loss of Alicia. Alicia admitted that everything was long in the past, and her story must have been incredibly helpful to the young gentleman in coming to his senses. An incredible amount had happened in the last 10 years of captivity, and the master of the house said that this year marked the 500th anniversary of the founding of the empire, and Nicholas must have become a grown man by now. Nicholas was the boy's dear younger brother, and the heroine saw him at a couple of parties held at the imperial palace. The young man was delighted as soon as he heard that the lady had also seen him, for he was incredibly eager to know how his beloved brother was doing. Alicia said she was known to be quite a nice person, but she really didn't want the young man to see what an arrogant fool his brother had become. One sunny summer morning at the Melfont estate, a letter arrived for the lady from an unknown addressee. Alicia's secretary, Erica, was the first to bring the unknown message and decided that she had to find out what was inside the letter. This letter was on behalf of the Paladins, informing them of the kingdom and its recent events regarding the cult responsible for the recent unrest. Recently, expeditions to the western borders of the kingdom have discovered Tantaros, the lair of Nyx. Inside the citadel, the boys discovered that Nyx had been kidnapping townspeople and sacrificing them to the dark deity, but by the time they arrived, Tantaros was already in ruins due to a mysterious attack. The letter stated that the location of the lady kidnapped at the festival was still unknown, and she could be anywhere. The letter was signed and sent by a paladin representative named Nicholas, and he advised against any contact with followers of questionable religious beliefs. The maid was perplexed as to what they should do with this now, since this news was completely unexpected for every resident of the estate. Erica reported that at least they knew Lady Alicia was definitely not in Tantaros, so either she was killed before the paladins arrived, or she most likely managed to escape. Alicia enjoyed a delicious breakfast this morning, chewing every bite with pleasure. Norman was greatly amused by the young lady's appetite for food, and he promised to bring her some warm drink. There wasn't much information about Norman in the novel, and Alicia didn't think that he would actually be such a caring person who would try to support a stranger in any difficult situation, assuring her that she would definitely cope with everything. Each time he told her that Alicia was an incredibly strong and brave girl who saved him from captivity, and she could deal with any villain. The young man saw how eagerly the girl ate her breakfast, and at that moment Alicia seemed incredibly sweet to him. On the first day, Alicia was kidnapped from the festival and thrown into Tantaros' dungeon, and for the next 2 days she was unconscious, which means she left Melfont Manor about 3 days ago. The little time Alicia had will help her rewrite the plot of the book and survive. But she was still unsure if it was enough to change her tragic ending, but the longer she delayed her return, the more danger her nephew would be in. Cousin Gale will certainly try to become little Alfred's guardian, and since the death of his parents, he has already set his sights on the Melfont fortune, not to mention her feeble-minded young man named Philip. Alicia knew he was waiting for the opportunity to get his hands on their family money and run away with his mistress. Alicia feared that without her, Alfred would be left to be torn apart by predators, and since she was left alone against the greedy nobles, who showed their true colors when the House of Melfont tragically fell. So Alicia no longer wanted anyone to think that she would allow other people to be impudent and take advantage of her kindness. She stated that she was heading to Katam, the closest town from here, and that was where the Romdak Guild was located, which she needed to find. Alicia decided she needed to find money for the trip, but she couldn't travel alone in her condition and she needed protection. The girl went out to the elderly couple living in the house and asked for forgiveness, asking if they knew where she could hire mercenaries without prepayment. The owner of the house asked if her husband should know about this, and Alicia did not understand which husband he was talking about. And at that moment, Norman entered the house, slowly opening the wooden front door. The young man asked the lady to go with him to the room and humbly asked for forgiveness, while Alicia asked him to explain why he called himself her husband. The lady has spoken out. She is a public figure, and if they run into people who know her, nasty rumors may start to spread. She admitted that it was better to tell these people the whole truth, since from now on their paths would have to diverge, and he was definitely not her husband. The young man was sure that they could not go their separate ways, and hearing this, Alicia was surprised by his words. He asked to be allowed to accompany the girl at least to her estate, so that nothing would happen to her on the way home, and the villain Nix would not find her. And Norman really wanted the lady to be completely safe and sound and get home, and forget about everything that happened, like a bad dream. Alicia thought that if she had someone to protect her along the way, it wouldn't sound so bad, but right now she couldn't focus on her personal safety. The first thing she needs to do is regain control of the estate, because a lot has probably changed during her absence, and this would need to be done as soon as possible. But Alicia assumed that Norman might interfere with the implementation of her plans. The return of the first son of the house and Diaz will attract strong attention of the public, and she will definitely be drawn into this story. And close attention always brings with it accusation. On top of that, Norman's pretty face is enough to draw a crowd. But to be honest, his mere existence made Alicia uneasy. For her, he was a living reminder that the book's curse was real. The young man continued to look at the girl, waiting for her to change her mind, and at that moment, the girl felt that he really wanted to help her. He asked her to stop pretending to be husband and wife, promising that he would be more careful in the future, if only she would allow him to accompany her. Alicia claimed Mr. Norman had gotten it all wrong, but she knew that was only part of the problem. Over the past 10 years, she has rebuilt House Melfont, working as a hidden merchant, and their power comes from trade and profit, not from lineage. The people of House Melfont chose survival over aristocratic dignity, and Alicia was the main organizer of everything that happened. She knew the villagers would welcome the young knight with open arms, but for her things would turn out differently. His return in the company of the witch Melfont will give the villains a reason to hunt the girl again, preventing her from calmly going about her business and living a happy life. The young man was still kneeling, waiting for Alicia to think about it and soon agree. Alicia couldn't find the right words, and the young man admitted that he didn't immediately understand how much the world had changed in the last 10 years, and the girl clearly felt that the young gentleman was offended. He only asked to summarize everything that was said above, because he too was a participant in strange events, and in general was imprisoned for the last 10 years against his will in the lake. He told her that the girl needed to return to Melfont Manor quickly, as there were those who wanted to take over her fortune, but if she went with him, it would attract unnecessary attention and delay her return, and rumors could start, which Alicia was incredibly worried about. But then the young man asked to tell the girl about the advantages of his accompaniment, and she was ready to listen to him with pleasure. Norman smiled and proudly replied that he was now the best guard for the girl, since she would not find anyone stronger and more resilient than a true knight of light. He showed the lady his hard muscles, stating that in terms of physical fitness, he was in his best shape when he was imprisoned, and his physical stamina was still intact. For some reason, his body remained the same, and Alicia couldn't tell if he was bragging or actually talking about his endurance. Norman admitted once again that he was much stronger than other men his age, and even a better mercenary bought with money could not compare with his strength, and he really wanted the lady to agree. Secondly, Norman is experienced in both direct combat and covert operations that require stealth, because no one even glanced at him when he bought baked goods at the local market square today. The lady really thought about it, because he can handle any emergency situations that arise and quickly get any robber or bandit out of harm's way. The girl asked the young man to stop bragging, suggesting that he really was as good as he claimed. Norman said he wasn't making any claims and that it was just a fact, but he probably wasn't convincing enough. Alicia asked. She really had doubts, but she changed her mind, and now she is very interested. Why is the boy so insistent on going with her? If he wants to do Mara's job, he can just go to the slums. The young man was sure that he owed the girl his life, but she claimed that she had freed him from the lake, and anyone else would have done the same. Norman claimed that the girl actually saved not only his body, but also his soul, because his body was actually trapped in a magical source. But at that moment, his soul was sinking deeper and deeper into the dark abyss of despair and hopelessness beyond the physical body, and from there he certainly would not be able to get out on his own. Therefore, he was sure that he owed the girl not only his life, but also his soul, and it was his personal desire to see the lady off in complete safety to the Melfont estate. He admitted that he wanted to see her return to her rightful place and that nothing unpleasant would happen to her that could threaten her life and health. So he extended his hand and once again asked with great care that Alicia would think carefully and give him the chance he was happy to take. It was very strange for the girl that the young man was showing such concern towards her, and seeing his serious attitude, she really thought about it. She took Norman's hand, knowing that in him the lady had a strong rear, and this gave her confidence. The place still held many memories, both good and bad, but she knew that returning was a step towards restoring order and justice. Having agreed to Norman's proposal, Alicia stated that the first thing they would need to do was draw up a security agreement. It required that she write that she agreed with Norman's words, but there were still some possible risks that they should discuss, and it was the written agreement that would prevent the parties from acting dishonestly. She suggested that the young men play it safe for the sake of both of them, and seriously write an agreement that could later solve the current difficulties. Norman watched her act carefully, and his heart filled with respect for her determination. The young man suddenly smiled, and Alicia couldn't understand what was funny in her words and why he was smiling so sweetly. He said that it was rare to meet a person who understood the structure of the world so well, and he was very surprised, because the girl's mindset was radically different from others he had met before. This was the best flattery for Alicia, and she offered to draw up the contract herself and present it to the young master soon. But Norman did not agree with her condition, asking the lady to do it together, taking into account the interests of both parties. They gathered together with Alicia to set off on their journey, thanking the residents of this house for their hospitality and promising that when the time came, they would definitely repay them in kind. The elderly couple, with happy smiles on their faces, said goodbye to the travelers who had dropped in to see them and wished them a safe journey. Norman asked the ladies to try to relax, otherwise they would attract unnecessary attention on the estate grounds. The contract stated that as a real couple, they were required to hold hands, and one party was required to disguise themselves when the other deemed it necessary. So the lady came closer to the young man and said that she should help him cover his face so that the locals would not recognize Norman. Ahead of them lay a path full of challenges, but they knew that together they could overcome any threat. Since they were now supposed to pretend to be a married couple, the young man, having embraced the lady in front of everyone, was now incredibly glad that he had agreed to sign the contract. Alicia said that the young man was probably too worried, because an ordinary local resident walked past them, who was probably passing by. The lady looked around, and it seemed they had just arrived at the place, and it was the Thule Market Square on the way to Katam. In her hands, she held her earring, a true legacy of her family that was at the center of their plan, money that could help in preparation for the upcoming trials. She raised her head and walked towards the table where the merchant stood, an experienced middle-aged man with shining eyes and the ability to evaluate any jewelry. The man looked closely at the jewel and said that he could offer a maximum of 1 gold piece. Alicia was outraged, claiming that the gem in this earring was purchased from the Ramdak Guild and polished by the best jewelers in the Imperial City, and he was offering such a ridiculous amount. The man asked if the girl really came from Ramdak, and the lady decided that if this was the best offer, she would have to accept it anyway. But she said that this would be the last operation in this particular store, because then Ramdak would not supply his goods to this establishment, and now the man had to make a choice on which the future of his business depended. The merchant had no other chance and agreed to raise the rate to the minimum market price, supposedly just for the lady's sake. When Alicia became a wine merchant, she learned all the tricks of the trade, and solely for the purpose of restoring the Melfont house and its people. Peasants who have no choice but to return to the forgotten ruins they once called home. After the tragic event, the maid was very worried. Lady Alicia went through a lot, left with a small baby in her arms. That evening, all the people who had escaped death by pure chance were in complete despair, because their lives had fallen on the shoulders of a fragile girl. Then Alicia came to the locals and appeared before them, declaring that she had arrived on behalf of the honorable and majestic guild. She was a frail and sickly daughter of a noble family who could only ride around the estate in a carriage under guard. A wide-eyed little girl in a cutthroat world, now faced with starting her own business from scratch. Then Alicia decided to go into the wine business, and they said about her, "This new trade guild was created by an aristocrat," and this was clearly some kind of joke. But she did not have time to mourn her fate, and she simply did not want to starve. That evening, Alicia got very drunk, celebrating her victory, because she had finally done what she had been planning for so long. The maid was very worried about the state of her mistress, because recently she had to endure a huge amount of pain, disappointment, and the loss of her entire family. Then the lady told the maid that the people she had found after examining them had agreed to buy their goods. And only by casting aside honor and dignity was she able to ensure the survival of her people, achieving great success in the wine business. Lady Alicia and Norman looked at the bag of money that the jewelry merchant had placed in front of them. The young man reported that the girl looked thoughtful, as if something had happened and she was really worried about something. She really hoped that the owner of the trading shop would not tell the locals too much so that no one else would find out about this deal. The man asked if he could help the still young couple in any way since their deal was coming to an end, and Alicia could take the money she had earned. She was sure that rumors would spread about her anyway, and she wanted them to be in her favor, so she asked the merchant to tell everyone that Alicia Melfont was heading to Katam, and the leader of Ramdak had returned. After a hard day, the young man and the girl went to the nearest tavern, and Alicia, sitting down on a chair for the first time that day, felt how tired she was. The young man assumed that they did not have enough money to rent a room, but it would soon get dark, and they needed a place to stay. The girl suggested trying to rent a place to stay on credit, but she couldn't reveal her identity, because then it could harm the reputation of the entire guild. They decided that they would have to camp outdoors. And besides, Alicia would rather pay for quality service than waste money on dubious establishments. The young man thought shopping malls like Katama always attract criminals, and they should probably stop somewhere else. House Melfont had no guards, and their nightly tradition had ended on that fateful night 10 years ago when all the knights were destroyed and no one else was willing to pledge allegiance to the fallen aristocratic house in the devastated land. Alicia assured them that everything was in perfect order, and even without the knights, they still managed to rebuild the house from the ashes and live a normal life. All this was undoubtedly thanks to Ramdak, and the lady felt a little ashamed of her words that the head of Ramdak had returned. The tavern had a warm and cozy atmosphere, and the young man decided to find out more about the girl, asking how she became a merchant. Alicia said that it was all thanks to the lotus flowers, and the epidemic that once spread to their lands destroyed the harvest and all the craftsmen. Just when she thought that people had exhausted all possibilities, her attention was drawn to the lotus flowers on the wild lake, which looked incredibly delightful. Lotus leaves are ideal for making tea, and their stems have always been available for sale as fuel. But the tea and fuel trade was not enough to get the Melfont house back on its feet, and Alicia again needed to find another solution. They then came up with a more profitable way to use lotus flowers, and began to make a unique wine from them that only the Melfont house could make. Thus, the people of the aristocratic house became the first house in history to create its own trading guild. Thanks to their aggressive trading policies, they amassed an unimaginable fortune just from lotus flower wine. People then invested the profits in other businesses to gain even more money: real estate, jewelry, and land. They had to find soldiers and privates to protect the people and the merchant fleet so that pirates would not be able to steal their ships one day. Alicia said that to others, she is a heartless and money-hungry witch that is whispered about behind her back at every party, and it can be said that she sacrificed her honor and reputation to get her money back. The young man smiled and replied that, in his opinion, the desire to make a profit in order to feed the people was much more noble than preserving the pride of an aristocrat without any benefit to those in need. The girl smiled and replied that she had long since stopped caring about honor and dignity, and all of this had become incredibly alien to her. Suddenly, voices were heard in the tavern, trying to understand whether it was really the head of Ramdak who was killed at the festival sitting in front of them. But for some reason, the girl was still alive. One of the men stated he could recognize those purple eyes a mile away, and she uses her guild to launch claws at Katam. The drunken young man immediately recognized the girl and asked if highborn people weren't supposed to sit around the estate, reading books and drinking tea. The men believed that the girl had no right to deprive them of their livelihood, and Alicia understood perfectly well that they were not at all mistaken. In the eyes of other merchants, she was a terrible competitor, and among the nobles, she was a hated outcast. But to everyone else, she was just an aristocrat selling wine, and most people didn't care who she really was, because the hated fools were simply jealous of her. But Alicia missed one important thing, and that day many wanted her to just die with her family. Alicia asked to ignore everyone present, because she had long been accustomed to people constantly whispering and gossiping behind her back. But Norman still had no intention of leaving this young man without an answer. In an instant, his hand clenched into a fist, and without hesitation, he rushed forward. Norman pressed his fist into someone's cheek, and the young man instantly sank to the ground, surprised and breathing shortly from the sudden blow. Alicia saw that these men couldn't even resist properly, and were like dogs that always barked and never bit. The girl asked Norman to stop because at this rate, he could easily cause serious harm to the stranger, especially since she said that everything was in perfect order. But Norman no longer heard her. His attention was focused on the young man who, trying to get up, hit the ground. Alicia was sure that it was enough to simply ignore everyone and not put such behavior on display, but Norman thought differently. He was sure that something was wrong with Alicia, because she ignored the cruel words addressed to her. He thought the bastard should learn to keep his mouth shut, but Alicia asked him not to make the situation even more difficult and not to be a fool. The men sitting at another table saw the fight and rushed towards the girl with Norman, shouting loudly, saying that the young man had behaved rudely towards their friend. Alicia grabbed the young gentleman by the hand and ordered him to leave immediately, but if he didn't want to, he could just stay here. Norman was no fool, and taking the girl's hand, he rushed out of the open door and ran away from this tavern. They rushed straight into the dark thicket of the forest, and the young man noticed that the young lady, as she ran, began to pant heavily, and so they moved forward again, leaving the conflict behind. But in Norman's heart there remained loyalty and zeal to protect his friend from all the adversity that they might face. Alicia was incredibly angry, because she had warned the young man in advance that everything was fine. And why was he now making such a fuss because of this, violating the signed agreement? Norman heard the girl's heavy breathing and asked her to run slower, otherwise she might soon feel ill, but in response she turned around sharply and screamed that she was tired of his constant fuss. The lady wondered if the young man really didn't like something, since he was irritating her with his words all the time. The young man stood with frightened eyes, not understanding why Alicia began to speak rudely to him, because he did not want to do anything bad to her. The lady was indignant. The noble scion of the House of Diaz clearly made it clear that he would not tolerate rude words, but the young man tried to calm her down, asking for forgiveness for his behavior, which probably simply offended her. But as a paladin, he couldn't let their ignorance go unpunished, because these bastards were completely wrong to allow themselves to be treated rather rudely. Alicia was outraged. She was already a disgrace to the aristocrats, a wine-selling girl who had exchanged her dignity for money, forgetting about honor and the opinions of others. Norman wanted the lady not to take it personally, and that they should simply continue on their way calmly. The boy insisted he still could not agree with the terrible words they said, just as he did not believe the dirty words that the curse whispered in his ear. The young man confessed that in that source he heard dark voices every second that demanded his death, claiming that it would only be better for everyone. In the tavern, he tried to ignore the words of those people, but Norman failed, and this situation deeply affected him. Once Norman heard that the men wanted the young girl and her family dead, he couldn't stand the endless insults he heard day after day. Long ago, evil tongues also wished him dead, assuring that without him, the life of all family members would be much better, and he should simply disappear. Gradually, negative thoughts led the young man to the conclusion that it was indeed better for him to die, and soon it was no longer the voices, but his own self that was trying to kill the soul and mind of the young master. After hearing the heartbreaking story, Alicia really wondered what could have taken the life of the Knight of Light, who had always been on the side of good. So he was sure that Alicia was an amazing person, unlike him, and it didn't matter at all how strong she was. He insisted that the girl should not allow strangers to treat her like that, and should not dare to belittle herself under any circumstances, trying to keep herself and her condition under control. The lady really thought about the young man's words, and in return, he asked her to promise that she would follow his advice. Alicia stated that since those thugs might come after us, they should probably go through the forest until they reached the designated point. The girl increasingly realized that she could not resist the incredibly sweet, kind face of the young man who looked at her with sincere eyes. The dark night was slowly descending over the forest, and the young man said that today the sky was full of stars, and it looked incredibly mesmerizing. Thousands of stars twinkled like tiny diamonds scattered across the dark blue velvet of the sky. Each one seemed alive. As if telling its own story, Alicia caught a glimpse of constellations that she had once been able to easily identify. But now they were mixed up in her memory. She remembered everything she knew about the stars, how they had always been a symbol of hope and dreams for her. The young man put a jacket on the girl's shoulders, confidently declaring that she would soon be able to see the beautiful night sky again, in complete safety. Norman stretched out on the soft green grass, enjoying the warm rays of the sun that gently touched his face. With his eyes closed, he felt that there was definitely someone next to him, and saw the silhouette of a girl, frightened by her unexpected appearance. Several minutes passed in this comfortable peace before the sound of footsteps and a quiet voice awakened him. Lady Alicia stood right in front of him, and from the serious expression on her face, it was obvious that she wanted to talk about something. The lady laughed that the young man had woken up so quickly, but a guard must always be ready for an enemy attack. Alicia laughed and said that the young man slept like a log, and no enemy could certainly wake him up. At that moment, Norman realized that Alicia's presence and her strength supported him as much as the feeling of warm sunlight. Seeing the sleeping bag and suitcase, the young man declared that Alicia was much more prepared for the trip than he was. The lady declared that in any case they would no longer wear out the soles of their boots, and from now on their journey would only bring joy and benefit. They continued their journey, stopping quietly near the bushes and watching the carriage pass by. The young man noticed that one of the knights was carrying Ramdak's flag, and the young man didn't expect that they would run into members of Alicia's guild so quickly. He assumed that the heavens themselves were probably looking after the girl, but the lady was sure that the heavens did not help anyone, especially her. Besides, she would still refuse help even if she had such an opportunity, because only she can help herself. Alicia confidently walked out in front of the passing cavalry and stopped right in the middle of the road so that people could immediately see her silhouette. She shouted loudly for one of the stand chiefs to immediately stop the carriage and carry out her order. The man replied that the woman probably didn't know that she was standing in the way of the acting head of the Ramdak Guild and probably should behave completely differently. Alicia stood confidently on the road, waiting for Stan to hear her words. There was a woman named Stan sitting in the carriage, and she was the acting head of the Ramdak Trade Guild, which was widely known throughout the empire. Alicia stopped in front of the carriage on purpose, expecting the guild leader to come out and pay attention to them. Because the respectable lady ran forward, noticing Alicia, one could judge that she was incredibly glad to see her. That's why she immediately hugged the girl who had disappeared without a trace, because everyone missed her incredibly. With tears in her eyes, she stated that she thought they had definitely lost Lady Alicia this time. The lady saw that Alicia looked incredibly thin. She immediately began to worry. The girl probably had been eating improperly or even starving all this time. Norman saw an incredibly touching scene, and Stan looked like a sincere and kind person, and it was strange, but behind her he saw a magical glow. The lady whispered in the lady's ear that she should definitely dump the sneaky Philip Morfak and take this nice guy who was sitting opposite her. Come to think of it, Alicia didn't need a guard anymore since Stan and a huge number of Ramdak knights were here. She suggested that traveling with a council knight would cause unnecessary trouble, and advised that a horse or carriage would be prepared for Norman to ensure his speedy return to his family. The girl said that it seemed like it was time to break their contract, and all the conditions of her escort were successfully fulfilled because she reached Ramdak safe and sound. In an instant, Norman's face changed to a sad one, and seeing this, Alicia gathered her strength and decided that she would never give in and fall for his tricks. Alicia informed him that the payment would be calculated according to the terms of the contract, and that a whole day would be deducted for the violent brawl in the tavern, so they should say goodbye where their paths diverged. The girl felt incredibly sorry that she couldn't just ignore him because she was a kind and sincere person. The young man still sat with sad eyes, saying that he was incredibly scared because over the last 10 years the world had changed incredibly much. And as for him, the young man felt lonely and a stranger here. He insisted that he could find his way home on his own and was probably trying to play on the feelings of the two ladies. Stan immediately informed that the young man could always go with them, but he wanted to hear the answer from Alicia herself. Alicia didn't want to make herself look like a villain, so she said the boy could go with him, but he wouldn't go with them specifically to the Melfont estate. Shortly before this, a maid at the Melfont estate received a message that Lady Alicia had been found and was now at the inn with Madame Stan. Although it wasn't them who found her, but the girl herself came to the guild, so her grace is now resolving the issues that have arisen. The messenger suggested that perhaps they should escort the girl here in safety, but that was out of the question, as Lady Alicia hated inefficiency. Therefore, the maid was sure that it was better to leave this matter to Madame Stan. She was capable and trustworthy. Besides, Lady Alicia knew Chatham like the back of her hand. The news that Alicia Melfont was alive and found reached one of the knights, who was incredibly awaiting her return. The maid stated that she ordered no one to worry or cause unnecessary panic until their mistress returned to the estate. But the inspired young man said that they should have told him first thing as soon as they found her, and that young man was Gano, a representative of the Ramdak Trading Guild. The maid asked him why he assumed that she had to do this, since he had not given any instructions. And probably the young man completely forgot that he treated the lady with the respect she deserved, and she was his boss, not a dear friend. The young man insisted that Lady Alicia herself would judge this, and one quiet conversation behind closed doors led him to the idea that he should check on the well-being of his dear Virtue. After all, only she could free him from this slave contract. The young man insisted that he was not going to argue with the maid, Erica, who believed that this was a legal employment contract. Erica asked the young man to get out of here and not do anything strange, because Lady Alicia is the leader and will return home accompanied by her loyal guild members. Gano didn't argue with Erica anymore, because he was sure that he was going to get her back on his own and didn't need anyone's help. Erica regretted getting involved in a conversation with the young man, and perhaps his impudence could become a real problem. The maid ordered them to quickly get ahead of Gano before this crazy young man reached the city. Meanwhile, Alicia had settled into the apartment in Katam, and that night was incredibly happy for her. And it was all because she finally lay down in a soft and cozy bed, which she had not done for a long time. Although this apartment couldn't compare to her home, a dry bed and a roof over her head were still much better than sleeping on the street. Since they had already reached Katam, Alicia needed to think about what to do next, because she couldn't just pat Norman on the back and send him packing. She decided that it was absolutely necessary to add a clause with a clear date to the contract, and she hastened to tell the Norm about her condition. Alicia was sure that she was doing the right thing, and that she should always complete unfinished business immediately, so as not to fill her head with unnecessary thoughts. Lady Alicia stood by the open window, enjoying the cool evening air that gently touched her skin. But suddenly her attention was drawn to a figure at the end of the corridor. It was Norman, and at that moment Alicia felt some special connection with this man, because he was not just a stranger to her, but tried to support her in difficult times. And now, seeing him, she felt a surge of hope and confidence that everything would be fine. The young man came closer to her and looked at the young lady with sincere eyes, as if trying to understand why she was looking at him so intently. But it turned out that Norman was not alone, and Madame Stan was carrying a new shirt in her hands, wanting to see how luxurious the young gentleman would look in it. Alicia completely lost track of what was going on when she saw the young man in his new clothes, and Madame Stan tirelessly praising his beauty. She asked the madam not to let his appearance fool her, for this man had once been a commander of the Paladins, and he was not the type to be used as a mannequin. But Madame was sure that with such a graceful appearance he could get everything he wanted, and yet he had to spend a decade away from civilization. And it is only fair that the young man should have the opportunity to experience what he has been missing all these years, and Lady Alicia should not be so categorical. She stated that she and the young man urgently needed to discuss an important contract on behalf of the guild, and she would not want anyone to interfere with them or eavesdrop. Madame Stan bowed, understanding the seriousness of the situation, and hurried out of the room, leaving the young couple alone. The young man noticed how quickly Madame left the office and declared that Lady Alicia had done a great job. The girl sighed and looked at the boy, stating that her words were not a lie and they really needed to talk. More precisely, they needed to discuss the contract and make some adjustments to it, which the young man was absolutely unwilling to do. They sat down at the desk, and the lady, taking up her pen, explained that the young man would be provided with transportation, some cash and food, so that he could get to his family estate. The shipment would be in about a week, and she added this clause to the contract asking if the young man would like to look at the changes. But Norman seemed not to hear her words, and looked somewhere in the center of the room with completely uninterested eyes. He stood by the window and saw people having fun outside, but in his heart there was sadness and great melancholy. Alicia pulled back the curtain and leaned forward to get a better look at the happy people on the street. Even in such difficult times, the city streets were crowded, and all the people lived their normal lives doing peaceful things. They were celebrating the founding of the empire, and this celebration would last for a whole month. And tonight, people would celebrate the solemn day, incredibly rejoicing in every moment of a happy life. It was an annual festival, and Norman must be familiar with it. Or perhaps he was rediscovering the world after 10 years of confinement. Alicia asked if the young man was interested. The guards could show him around, but he would have to hide his face since his family had already been informed that he was alive. Norman promised to be more careful, asking if the girl was going to go with him. She said this. Supposedly a lot of work awaits her, but in that case, he will have to remind the girl again of the terms of their contract. They would still have time to discuss serious conversations, but now all they needed was to simply enjoy the moment. For the girl, it was a blow below the belt, but a few minutes later she was walking through the city streets as the terms of the contract required. Even with the amendments, the contract is still valid for another week, and as a security guard, Norman must stay with the girl for the entire duration of the contract. Therefore, he stated that he would not be able to move freely without Alicia's accompaniment, and that he would have to be with him all week. A purple hairpin flashed in his hand. It was exquisite, with fine carvings and shiny stones that played in the light. The young man tried it on the girl's hair, amazed at how the purple color suited her very well and resembled a lotus flower. Alicia held her breath slightly as he carefully gathered some of her hair and pinned it up into an elegant pattern. And at that moment, it wasn't just the locals of the town who were watching the special couple. A man in a black hood sat on the roof, whispering something about the gentleman who asked to take this vicious soul. Norman's simple encouragement lifted Alicia's spirits and gave her confidence, so they continued their pleasant walk. Suddenly, a boy running past pushed the girl, and Norman grabbed her with special care so that she would not get hurt under any circumstances. There were indeed too many people on the streets, so the young man asked the girl to take his hand so that it would be easier for him to keep an eye on her safety. The lady was embarrassed, she doesn't like unnecessary touching, and decided that she needed to answer the young man with a categorical refusal. The stranger heard Alicia's laughter, which sounded like music, filling the air with joy. Her smile, even from afar, radiated warmth, and Norman, having amused her, looked incredibly happy next to her. This man was clearly a messenger of the dark forces, and illuminated by a green light, he dreamed that Alicia Melfont would walk with him, because she was destined to go to the darkest depths of hell. He cast a silent spell, and green magic erupted from his hands like a poisonous stream, rushing towards her. But just at that moment, when the villain began to read the spell, a young man appeared behind him, grabbed him and promised to stand silently, or he would wring his neck. Their bond and determination were strong enough to overcome any challenge, but they were unaware of the danger that lay ahead. The guild leader who came for Alicia immediately grabbed the stranger who was trying to cast a dark spell and tied his hands. He had to find out who this man was, who had just brazenly prevented him from following the girl. As soon as the young man saw the attacker's face, everything became crystal clear to him. A few hours ago, a young man stood next to Ophelia asking what she was doing here. The mysterious girl ordered to do as she says if she does not want Alicia to return safely back to the estate. The young man screamed, "How dare Ophelia talk to him? She is a fugitive criminal, and let him name at least one reason why he should not throw her in prison." Ophelia insisted. She was not asking to fulfill the request, but was trying to give a warning, and the young man should not allow anything to happen to Alicia. And if he misses and makes a mistake, the girl promised that she would return and strangle the young man with her bare hands who failed to cope with a simple task. So now he was trying to find out from the mysterious attacker the answers to the questions that interested him. He asked if it was true that the villain's Nyx had sent him, and how many people had come to kill Alicia that evening. The man remained silent, not saying a word, and the young man realized that he should follow a different path. He stated that he had not planned to let the attacker go anyway, and swung his sword at him with particular fury. They walked slowly through the festive night town, and the girl's gaze was drawn to the unusual purple petals scattered on the ground. The young man also noticed how purple petals slowly fell to the ground, and some lady on the street skillfully picked them off. These were flower petals, and some fortune-tellers used them for fortune-telling, but in front of them they saw a little girl holding a purple flower. These wildflowers are never found in gardens, but their unique color and shape are captivating. But if you pick them and put them in a vase, they won't last even a day. The young man noted that Alicia seemed to really know a lot about flowers, and conversations with her were fascinating. Alicia thought she really loved these flowers before, and it was her special memory from her past life. Ophelia had a special affection for the purple flowers of Teresia, and loved to make bouquets of them. There was a time when we laughed a little together in a field completely covered with these beautiful flowers. She was the purest person Alicia had ever met, and the girl's soul was incredibly kind. One day, Ophelia handed her a flower and told her that these were her favorite flowers and that they always reminded her of her family connection with Alicia. And she really still considered this flower a symbol of her connection with her sister, but no matter what she thought of her, wherever she went, the shadow of doubt would always hang over Ophelia's soul. After the tragic incident at Melfont's house, the Emperor issued an order to capture Lady Ophelia. Erica thought that since Her Highness had become a victim, she had every right to do so, and the Emperor should give permission. Erica noticed that the flowers were still in the girl's vase, and it was incredible that she had managed to keep them fresh one day. Alicia looked at the purple flowers with bitterness and wished that no one would remind her of Ophelia anymore. She asked for a reward to be put up for the girl's capture because she knew she had to be caught immediately. As a citizen of the Empire and the head of the house, she had to fulfill her duty, whatever it was, so the girl had to send a family member to prison. Their wonderful time together came to a bitter end, and now the purple flowers are more reminiscent of pain and loss than of love and joy. Ophelia once believed that perhaps the divine powers had chosen Alicia, because even such delicate flowers blossom in her hands. But now Alicia considered all this incredible nonsense, and purple became the color of sadness for her. The girl asked if Norman wanted to approach the fortune teller out of curiosity, since he had never done this in his life. The young man greeted the girl holding the purple flower with embarrassment, because it was the first time in his life that he had seen a real fortune teller. He took the bouquet of purple flowers in his hands with particular joy and asked the lovely lady to tell his fortune about the future. Norman nodded, feeling something incredibly bright and kind light up inside him. The young man asked again if the fortune teller could tell his fortune, and for some reason she reached out to remove the mask covering Norman's face. Alicia was afraid that the young man's appearance might be exposed, so she shouted at him to be more careful. The fortune teller managed to remove the hood from the young man, and the next second his appearance was visible to almost all passers-by. They saw the young master's dazzling silver hair, and immediately realized that he was probably the missing heir of the House of Diaz. The girl had no choice but to grab the young man by the hand and run away without looking back, before anyone thought of catching them. Locals noticed silver hair and golden eyes, not understanding what Norman Diaz was doing there, because they say he has been missing for a long time. Guildmaster Guno claimed that these turtles from Ramdock would find Alicia faster, but out of the corner of his ear, he suddenly heard the locals talking about a strange woman with Mr. Norman, specifically a lady with purple eyes. The young man approached the locals who had spoken these words and asked, it was very important for him to know where the mysterious lady with purple eyes had gone. At this time, Alicia and Norman had just reached a safe place where they stopped to catch their breath after the long run. The girl took the young man by the hand, and he remembered her words that she did not like unnecessary touches. Alicia felt the young man's touch, and at that moment he caught her angry look. He looked down in embarrassment, saying that he was very sorry and that nothing would have happened if they hadn't gone anywhere. The girl suddenly laughed, and Norman didn't immediately understand what was going on, but she couldn't believe that he had actually taken those purple flowers. She laughed. This could cause new rumors, because the poor fortune teller was robbed by the noble Mr. Norman, and it seemed that her laughter could be heard throughout the town. Alicia admitted that she was just joking and promised to make sure that the girl received good compensation for the fact that the young gentleman unexpectedly took all her flowers. Norman was very upset that his actions had incredibly upset the young lady. Alicia was sure that false rumors might start, and besides, she needed to warm up because she hadn't run for a long time. Norman said he should have been more careful. They could have run further if they hadn't been caught, but they didn't even have time to see the whole festival. Alicia asked the young man to frown, and sometimes such an expression on his face can drive people away from him, and she also suggested that the young man spit at every step, so that no one would want to approach him. And then no one will understand that such a rude person can be a real son of the aristocratic house of Diaz. Their relationship can contain laughter, and the lady asked him to stop laughing, because she was sure that he was saying very serious things. The young man kept forgetting that he had been locked in the source for the last 10 years, and that life around him had changed dramatically. At first he was surprised how easily terrible memories were forgotten, but now he understood the reason for everything that was happening. And the main reason for his joy is that Alicia is next to him and helps him cope with difficulties. He knew the long road would not be easy, but he was ready to move forward towards his destiny and towards Alicia. The girl held in her hands the flower wreath that the young gentleman had given her, and she liked it incredibly. The young man was happy that the wreath was to the taste of the young lady, and these moments brought him true joy. Not long before this, the young man himself carefully wove this wreath for the girl from the bouquet of purple flowers that he mistakenly took from the fortune teller. Most likely, this wreath was not similar to the wreaths that the girl's friend wove, but Norman, with all his heart, wanted to do something nice for Alicia. A festive atmosphere was in the air, filled with laughter and joyful voices of residents preparing for the famous fireworks display that was set to light up the night sky. Norman was very sorry that they would not be able to see the fireworks even closer, but this was only a rehearsal for tomorrow's celebration, and they were saving the best for the main part. Alicia knew that Norman probably wanted to see the fireworks, and she couldn't just ignore him. So she confidently stated that the young man would need to pick out a better disguise, and together they could go and watch the holiday fireworks. He happily stated that he needed a large hood and a suitable cape, and then he would be able to completely hide his eyes and hair. He suggested to the girl that she could guide him, and he would hold on to her sleeve so that no one could see his eyes. Norman's charm was hard to resist, and he was sure it was a good plan, but he couldn't do it alone and would need an escort. Alicia couldn't refuse the young master because his satisfied face stood right in front of her. She sealed the contract with the little finger of her right hand and suggested that she could fulfill the young man's conditions so that he could finally see the first fireworks in his life. Ophelia was also a beautiful character, but now Sir Norman was in Alicia's life, and she could no longer deny that she had certainly been deprived of beauty. They continued their festive walk, and on their way they unexpectedly encountered frolicking boys running along the street. One of the boys suddenly fell down, and a worried Alicia immediately rushed to him to check if he was okay. The boy was crying loudly and had probably hit something, so Alicia asked if he would be able to get to his feet. All this time, Norman watched her behavior closely, and he really saw such a kind girl for the first time in his life. The boy calmed down very quickly after her words, and it was clear from his sincere eyes that the support of an unknown girl had helped him incredibly. At that moment, Norman remembered his brother, and the day he last saw him, he was about the same age. The boy's brother ran up to him and said it was just a scratch and thanked the unfamiliar lady for her help. The lady thought, in their days, children have become so strong and resilient and enjoy every moment. Suddenly, Norman put his hand to his chest and bowed his head to the girl, and she did not understand at all why he was doing this. It seemed to her that Norman's emotions were shaken, and the young man was simply torn apart by overwhelming feelings. He threw himself into the girl's arms, and it was the first time Alicia had seen him behave like that. Norman buried his face in her shoulder and began to cry, asking the girl for forgiveness. This boy reminded him of Nicholas, and on his face he saw only guilt and anger, and he was very worried that his brother could still blame him. He was not at all sure whether his birth family would accept him, and he was not even sure whether he would be able to look into his brother's eyes again. Alicia claimed his family would be overjoyed to have him back home, but somehow Norman felt differently. He claimed that he had let his older brother down, and what happened that day must have left a terrible scar on his soul. Then he was taken hostage, and they never saw each other again. That day, Iago cast a curse on Norman, and it could have traumatized his brother. What's worse, his disappearance means that at such a young age he has had to shoulder the responsibilities of successor. And he certainly wouldn't be thrilled about Norman's return, and the young man was completely sure of it. Guilt prevented Norman from understanding the true essence of things, and much of what seemed to him did not actually make sense. Nicholas actually grew up to be an arrogant person, but he certainly wasn't stupid enough to shun his own brother because he had once been a victim. Alicia was sure that Norman had a chance to return home and live a normal, happy life, because she knew it was written in the magical novel she read at the magical source of imprisonment. When Iago's curse sealed Norman's soul, Nicholas awakened within himself a magical, divine power. Iago realized that he was doomed to failure, but this time he was incredibly close to achieving his selfish goals. He was depressed and had Norman almost in his grasp, but his plan failed miserably. Although he never achieved his goal, the curse he had cast still returned, and Iago could not avoid it. With all the power of the caster's negative emotions that fueled him, he received a counterattack from the dark, sinister magic. That night, Nicholas could only watch as his brother was taken as a living trophy into the endless darkness. This memory still burns brightly in his mind, and it is unknown whether Nicholas was offended by the fact that his brother once abandoned him in childhood. And now the brothers were about to meet after a long separation, but there was another side to the relationship between them. Once Nicholas reached adulthood, he was appointed the new commander-in-chief of the Paladins. The Emperor solemnly presented the young man with his high status at an official ceremony, expressing great respect and gratitude. Nicholas knew that he owed his strength and tenacity only to his missing brother, because if he had not been imprisoned in the source, the status of commander-in-chief would have gone to Norman. Without this, he would never have had the courage to travel the world in search of his missing brother. Nicholas's search not only made him a better person, but also one day brought him together with the beautiful Ophelia, who later became his lover. It was on this journey that he found a girl lying unconscious in the forest, and at that time she needed help. In the end, Norman was the piece of the puzzle that completed the story of Nicholas Diaz, the protagonist of the novel Ophelia's Night. Alicia knew very well that it was Norman who was the reason for his brother's high successes and victories. She understood that the young man felt all this too, and his fears about his brother could be true. There are reasons why Nicholas became who he is today, and Alicia tried her best to explain it to the young master. The lady sat on her bed in her bedroom that evening and cried bitterly, worried that she had not been able to tell Norman anything. It wasn't even her business, but Alicia was incredibly worried, and one young man just wouldn't leave her thoughts. It was because Mr. Norman was a descendant of an aristocratic family, and because of this she couldn't just forget, because she would be blamed if he couldn't return to his family. Alicia never liked misunderstandings, but she was sure she would definitely cope with this. She jumped out of bed and walked confidently into Norman's room, but the young man did not expect to see a lady at such a late hour. The girl asked to talk, and this conversation was now very important for both of them. Alicia decided to say it straight out. She knew that returning to her family was not at all what the young master was thinking about right now. She saw that the young man's face was flushed with embarrassment, and it was obvious, but he was just shy. The girl admitted that everyone had laughed at her all her life, and she had to always defend her opinion and life position. When she first announced that she would restore the Melfont house on her own, even her relatives did not believe that the young, fragile lady could succeed. She never listened to any nonsense, because then she had only one choice: to get involved in stupid gossip or to do things that would be useful in the future. Alicia then brushed off the insults and did everything in her power, casting aside unnecessary doubts and fears. She asked Norman if he thought she should have listened to her relatives and let them pick apart the remains of the house like the vultures they are. Alicia was sure that no one could achieve what they wanted by sitting back and doing nothing. And does the young master really want his brother to spend the rest of his days searching for Norman and pondering his tragic fate? The young man understood that this was not a way out, so Alicia insisted that he meet Nicholas in person and tell him that he was very sorry. And if that's not enough, Norman will have to find another way to restore family ties. Alicia's words and support were incredibly helpful in helping the young man gain confidence in his abilities and make the right decision. But suddenly, there was a loud knock at the door, and the lady and Norman looked at the front door in anticipation. It was Madame Stan, and as usual, she appeared at the most inopportune and unexpected moment. Madame was very happy to find them both in the same room because she wanted to treat each of them with delicious and fresh sweets. Alicia thanked the lady for the snacks, but the young man did not even know how to react to the kindness of the respectable lady. Madame Stan asked Norman to be a man and act because they were both young and full of desire, and there was absolutely nothing to be embarrassed about. Alicia felt incredibly awkward and asked Madame Stan to come out with her and discuss something. They never managed to finish their conversation with Norman, and Alicia instantly disappeared, apparently not wanting to continue a serious conversation. Her words left Norman with warm emotions, and he felt great support and care from Alicia. An enraged Alicia and Madame went out into the corridor, and she was in the mood for a serious talk. She asked Stan to stop this behavior immediately, but the lady insisted that it was time for the girl to think about it. The lady insisted that Philip was an incredible non-entity and that he only wanted money. And did she really want to marry this pathetic skirt chaser? Unlike this ferret, Norman comes from a noble family, he is pure, and he has great merits both in appearance and character. It was incredibly difficult for Alicia to refuse the lady because she was right in everything she said. She stated that she had no other choice. A competent husband would be a threat to Alfred's future, and she would not allow anyone to stand between her nephew and his inheritance. Besides, it's rude to force Sir Norman when he's not even interested in her as a girl. Alicia asked the lady to promise that she would stop trying to set him up with Sir Norman. The girl left the room, and on her way she again encountered Norman, from whom she now experienced strange sensations. Alicia decided that they should all have lunch together, and in a calm environment they could talk amicably. Norman asked sheepishly if he could ask one question: what kind of man was Lady Alicia's chosen one? The girl replied that Norman had probably never heard of him. He was a minor nobleman from the western borders. This nobleman was Philip Morflock, and judging by the fact that Norman knew his name, he was probably acquainted with him. Madame Stan smiled and said that as soon as Norman returned home, he too would need to look for a suitable partner, but the young man was sure that no one would want to marry someone like him. Before his disappearance, Norman Diaz was even engaged to a girl and had a love affair. His lady love was Princess Calliope, who was a promising contender for the throne. Luton's most eligible bachelor and the successful heir to the crown created a perfect picture together, and everyone called them the couple of the century. However, shortly after Norman's disappearance, the grief-stricken princess suddenly committed suicide, and this was the official version announced. But in Ophelia's night it is said something completely different. And the truth is that Calliope was seduced into worshipping the dark deity by one of the imperial priests. And it was the same psycho who mercilessly destroyed the Melfont house named Nyx. The girl seemed deaf to everything else except the corrupting influence of Nyx, so she performed a cursed ritual, the reason for which is not revealed even in the novel. It was this dark ritual that awakened the seed of envy that lay deep dormant in Iago's mind. In the end, Norman's own fiancé had a hand in his kidnapping and was the one responsible for his disappearance. Alicia couldn't believe she'd forgotten it, since she was the one who told Norman how the ritual's side effects had killed the princess. The girl felt terribly sorry because she had to remember that the princess had allegedly tragically committed suicide. Norman insisted that everything was fine and that it had more to do with politics than the unpleasantness of the incident. And after all, asking for the hand of the ex-fiancé would cause great indignation, and if the nobility henceforth avoided Norman, this was probably the reason. The girl was embarrassed because she thought she had touched on a rather deep topic of conversation. The young man wanted to be frank with Alicia, so he had no intention of hiding anything from the girl who saved him. He said that he felt incredibly lucky to have become the most unenviable bachelor in the empire. The girl's surprise was written on her face, and she did not expect Norman to have such an opinion of himself. The lady even thought that Norman was repeating her words, because earlier she had said that the more insignificant her husband was, the better it would be. Alicia thought Norman was too modest, but as soon as he returned to his family, there would immediately be many ladies who would want to marry him. The young man admitted that this would clearly be a marriage of convenience with a woman he didn't even know, and that such an outcome was probably not something to be happy about. Everyone wants to marry for love, but this is only possible in fairy tales. The vast majority of people are forced to accept it. The young man was surprised that the girl also wanted to marry for love, and for some reason her words made him incredibly happy. Madame had been listening attentively to their conversation, and now Alicia clearly felt how strangely she was looking at her. Behind her, she heard slow, quiet steps and the voice of a young man with whom she seemed to already be familiar. Suddenly, the girl was hugged with all her might by the guild leader Gano, and his appearance was as unexpected as the strong embrace. The young man sat down next to her and asked if the girl hadn't missed him all this time. She stated that the young man was merely her bloodhound and not a lapdog that needed looking after. The young man replied, whether a bloodhound or not, a dog always wags its tail when it sees its master. And for the fact that the lady was gone for an incredibly long time, she definitely owed him a big hug. Norman had never seen such an impudent guy before and was stunned by his eccentric behavior. Alicia pushed the young man away from her sharply and declared that if he tried to hug her again, she would definitely make him regret it. Madame called this special move the Nutcracker's Blow, and the head of the guild now lay face down on the floor in front of everyone. The lady asked why he couldn't wait in Romdak if he knew she was completely safe, and now the guild would have to pay for his long trip. The young man said with a happy face that he couldn't do anything because he missed her so much. Alicia understood that Gano had other selfish goals, because their relationship had always been rather difficult. The lady asked the young man to stop talking nonsense and give an account, and then disappear from her sight. She saw that Sir Norman was still standing there in bewilderment and politely asked him to forgive her for what had happened. Taking the young man by the hand, she said that she needed to discuss guild affairs with her colleague. Alicia spoke up. She really enjoyed the shared breakfast, and she thanked everyone present for the warm and pleasant company. They went into a secluded room with the guild leader, and there the young man confessed that he had recently encountered Lady Ophelia. Alicia immediately became indignant, promising to wring his neck if this was one of his stupid jokes. The young man confessed his words were true. He really saw her at the entrance to Khatam, and as a devoted slave, he cannot lie to his beautiful mistress. When he saw Ophelia, the first thing he did was ask what she was doing there, because her appearance was extremely unexpected. She called him along and gave him some instructions. Ophelia warned him that if he wanted Alicia to return safely, he should do as she said. Gano relayed the information verbatim and then described how he went to the market square to check if her words were true. On the roof of one of the buildings, he actually found a cultist casting a spell as Ophelia had promised. Alicia confessed that she urgently needed to see Ophelia, and Gano was very surprised by her words. Alicia grew more and more angry with each passing second, and then ordered Gano to bring Ophelia to her immediately. Madame Stan stayed with Norman, and the young man, taking advantage of the opportune moment, decided to find out who Gano was to Alicia. The lady assured him that everything was not as Norman thought, and that this young man was nothing more than a co-founder of the guild. It turned out they were in the same position, and Norman suggested that they might be very close. But Stan insisted that Gano was a co-founder only on paper, but under the terms of the contract, he was more like an employee. So Stan asked to ignore him, and now he is only responsible for export to another kingdom. Alicia has to put up with Gano's character because she needs someone to do the hard work, and he's perfect for the job. The young man noticed that for an ordinary worker, he was not averse to using his charm and showing off in front of Alicia. Madame Stan admitted that, to be honest, it's not just the contract that keeps him here, and he stays because he's in love with Milady. But Gano is not at all to Lady Alicia's taste, and Norman shouldn't even worry about it. He looks more like a lone pirate posing as a nobleman by purchasing a fake identity, and his very demeanor screams low birth. When it comes to men, Lady Alicia prefers more refined and aesthetically pleasing individuals like Mr. Norman. After these words, the young man smiled thoughtfully, and he knew that Madame Stan would not lie to him. He said that he had a very important meeting scheduled for that evening and asked the experienced Madame Stan to give him a couple of pieces of advice. Alicia was still with Gano, and he asked her not to be upset anymore about his unexpected appearance. Come to think of it, something terrible could have happened if he had dragged himself along like her guards, and Alicia would have already been cursed with a dark curse. The young man said that this was their first meeting with Ophelia, and she was different from the image on the wanted posters and looked tired. Alice's guards should arrive today, and with them she will be completely safe, and Gano can focus on his new mission. Gano asked what they should do when they caught Ophelia, and whether they should throw her in prison. The lady asked that Ophelia be brought to her first, as she had some important questions for her. She ended up owing her a lot of answers, and the lady was wondering how she knew that one of Nyx's minions would be in this city to attack. There is certainly no chapter in Ophelia's Night that begins with the words that Lady Alicia Melfont survived. In the book, such a possibility was not even allowed. And no matter how hard people tried to avoid death, the ominous curse still overtook it. This meant that it was impossible to know how the girl's future might change, and whether she would remain alive. Overnight, Alicia's fate really changed dramatically, and there was no turning back. She herself had to awaken the power and prove that she was capable of more than other people thought. Alicia was haunted by the question of how Ophelia could have foreseen the danger threatening her. If you think about it, it's quite strange that she would turn to Gano, and it's obvious that Alicia is a stranger to her. She wondered if Ophelia knew that the only way to regain her divine power was to kill her. She would be able to do anything. Gano noticed that the lady began to tremble violently and seemed to stop perceiving the surrounding reality, and her eyes became frightened. He hugged the girl, asking if she was okay because the lady looked very pale and sickly. Alicia admitted that there was nothing to worry about anymore and she would not let anyone or anything kill her. Gano was sure that Alicia Melfont could handle anything, and besides, who would want to meet the owner of such a hot slave like him? Although Gano behaved in an impudent manner, this young man was kind and knew how to provide support. Suddenly, 3 young men approached them and asked for forgiveness, saying that they were checking something after the assassination attempt. According to their information, Alicia was kidnapped by Nyx, who was later taken into custody at the scene of the kidnapping. The girl already knew everything, and the young man should take care of his duties and errands. The knights silently agreed with the young lady's order and set out to carry it out. It was known to all that the heretic was to be sealed beneath a spring deep within the temple, without the ability to see the light of day until the end of time, so that his dark side could never harm anyone again. Alicia knew that if Nyx was indeed sealed away, she would have no reason to rush back to the estate and would have time to take extra precautions. One of her comrades was not sure because the name was unfamiliar to him. Alicia said that she knew of a place called Tantaros, and Gano wondered how she knew about it. The girl confessed that she was locked in a mysterious place, and it was there that she first woke up. Alicia asked who found Nyx in Tantaros, and it turned out to be the paladin captain Sir Nicholas. This means that Ophelia is definitely involved in this, and Nicholas is just an accomplice who helps her avoid capture. Alicia still couldn't understand how Ophelia had managed to find the rather unknown Tantaros in the first place. Gano had just heard from the scouts that Nyx had been captured, so the lady claimed he had nothing more to worry about. Gano grabbed his head, remembering that Alicia had new responsibilities and that she was bound by a contract with the young man. He stated that since the girl had decided to go this way, he should leave her company. Alicia felt that Gano was clearly upset about something and was acting like he was very worried. The novel clearly described that only Ophelia could find the mysterious Tantaros and knew where it was. She learned this from the information Nyx left on the note when he killed Alessia. He left behind a small piece of paper that described the location of that very Tantaros. And all this for the dramatic moment of the murder of the main character, exactly when Ophelia arrives there in the first second. According to the novel, Ophelia went to Nyx's fortress to save Alicia, and without that she has no reason to know about the existence of this place. But as it turned out, she still went there to save the person who was dear to her. The lady thought perhaps Ophelia could see the future and really wanted to save her. After talking with Gano, Alicia went to her room and slammed the door loudly, finally being left alone with her thoughts. She couldn't guess if Ophelia knew how to get her divine power back, and why she went looking for Gano in the first place. Suddenly, she saw Teresia's purple flower, and at that moment, a strong tremor and excitement ran through the girl's body. Lady Ophelia herself stood before her, saying, "Alicia still looks as good with the Teresia flowers as if she was born for them." Alicia saw a familiar face and asked the girl to show herself immediately. In front of her really stood Ophelia, whom they had not seen for many years, and Alicia's heart was pounding wildly from the unexpected meeting. Ophelia smiled her usual sweet smile and said quietly, "They haven't seen each other for too long." But her interlocutor was not in such a pleasant mood and looked at her friend with tears in her eyes. She immediately remembered Nyx and all this horror that happened to her family solely because of her fault. And the girl was once again overcome by the wave of emotions and disappointment that she had experienced on that fateful night. The moment Nyx's blade pierced Alicia's flesh, Ophelia saw that moment. The divine power that had kept her alive for all 10 years instantly returned to its true owner. giving Ophelia even greater strength in body, mind, and soul that she can never give up. Ophelia took a few steps forward, as if trying to explain herself, but the lady could no longer contain her feelings and burst into tears. She stopped, and her expression changed from a light, carefree smile to surprise. Alicia could no longer contain her emotions and slapped Ophelia in the face with all her might, asking her not to come closer because she had caused her so much pain. Her tears gave way to incredible anger, and she confidently ordered the girl not to dare take another step in her direction. Alicia held a dagger in her hands, and at that moment Ophelia realized that the girl was serious and could very well finish her off. At that moment she remembered the words of Norman, who promised to always be there, and recently it was he who gave her a sharp dagger. He asked to carry it with him at all times, but he didn't want the weapon to ever actually be needed. Alicia would always remember the day she and Ophelia saw each other for the last time. Ophelia left them to die without saying a single word, as if they had been strangers their entire lives. She was the one who betrayed the friendship first, while Alicia always trusted and was sure that Ophelia could not betray her. And according to what the book says, death will come to Alicia if Ophelia remains alive. She wanted to find out how the girl knew where to look for her, but Ophelia insisted that her friend calm down first. But the pain that had been sitting deep inside all this time did not allow me to change my anger to mercy and communicate calmly. Alicia asked the runaway to stop pretending to be caring because she brought pain and suffering to her entire family. She felt incredibly sickened by the behavior and disgust she felt towards this girl. Ophelia's eyes expressed great fear, but she claimed that she would never harm Alicia, and she knew it perfectly well. The girl claimed that she only wanted to protect her loved one from danger, but Alicia did not believe a single word, and the blame for the death of the family hung solely on her. Alicia sighed, her heart was broken, but at the same time she felt hope awakening within her. With a sharp movement, she pushed Ophelia to the floor, and was now going to tell her everything that had happened because of her fault. Alicia felt her anger slowly give way to sadness, but still, Ophelia's words sounded like payment for the loss. Ophelia looked incredibly confused, but she really wanted her friend to believe her words. No matter how hard Alicia tried to move on, the book continued to haunt her memory, showing her scenes from its pages, and last night was no exception. In the dream, one of Nyx's subordinates jumped out of the shadows to kill Ophelia on the orders of the Dark Lord. Even though Ophelia had trained hard since losing her divine essence, she was unable to repel the ambush in time. And in the end, in the battle, Ophelia lost her hand, and for her that day, it was the best outcome. The right arm was returned to the shoulder, but the healing magic was not enough to fully restore it. So Alicia immediately saw and asked why her hand was still intact. Ophelia was surprised to hear these words, because Alicia simply could not have known about this from somewhere. The girl burst into bitter tears, assuming that her friend should not have known about this. It was no big secret to Alicia, and she also knew that Ophelia's great and mighty power was the only thing keeping her alive. She asked if the lady was hinting that she should have died long ago, since everyone knew that too. She wanted to find out if Ophelia knew for sure that her death was the only hope for a happy life. Ophelia looked into her friend's disappointed eyes and promised that she would not let her die. The girl was ready to admit that her fate was sinful, and it would have been better if she had never opened the novel Ophelia's Night. For Ophelia's story to continue, Alicia's life must end. And then Ophelia will shine, and Alicia's last 10 years should be erased as an inappropriate joke. She knew Ophelia felt that she could never kill her, but now the lady didn't know what to expect from the mysterious girl. Alicia had no more chance of surviving if Ophelia died, and they both knew it. Ophelia felt incredibly sorry that her friend had crawled here like a rat just to cry. And so, before they parted again, Alicia wanted to know the answers to all the questions. She wanted to make this romance work for her, but she wasn't sure if she had another chance. So she asked if it was possible to control the mighty divine power and survive after the end. And at that moment, despite the years and pain that had passed, both friends realized that their connection was stronger than any obstacles, and the possibility of restoring their friendship still existed. Alicia told Ophelia about the miraculous power that she was so proud of and wanted to know how to control it. She had been able to activate it in Tantaros, and now she wanted to know how to repeat the trick again. Ophelia had no idea that Alicia had managed to activate her magical power, and the girl's reaction was frightened. The lady thought that the magical power was right now inside her, and she wanted to use it to live a long and happy life. And Ophelia can now definitely help her and tell her how to make friends with strong magic. Ophelia said that in order to use magical power, one must call upon it with all one's heart. The girl immediately blushed, and her friend began to worry, because Lady often had a fever as a child. She touched the girl's face, but Alicia asked her not to digress and answer the question. There were some risks involved in choosing to give up her divine power, and if she simply gave it up, it would attract Nyx. So Ophelia cast a special spell on the lady that hides her divine power, and it seems she knew all along that her friend was calling her for help. Nyx's minions were making human sacrifices on Tentaros, but for some reason Ophelia didn't try to save everyone. She admitted that she couldn't afford to ruin the chance. She simply had no other choice, and she had to wait for Alicia to make her move. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense, because she saw with her own eyes how Alicia died back then in Tantaros. The girl was perplexed. Ophelia was clearly talking complete nonsense, as if she had hit her head somewhere. She remembered that day exactly, and all the memories were clear as if it had happened yesterday. It later turned out that Ophelia had been living without her friend for 2 years, and her death actually happened. Ophelia's night narrative ends exactly 18 months after her death, and it took her a year to kill Nyx and track down his minions. But 6 months later, she married Nicholas, trying to create a happy, perfect family. Alicia claimed the final chapters of Ophelia's night end in 18 months, but Ophelia says 2 years. The lady looked at Alicia with excitement and did not understand what Ophelia's night was being talked about. Did she really not know anything? But Alicia was sure that her friend would be engaged to Nicholas and was going to marry him. But now Ophelia has appeared, claiming to have seen her death happen. The lady asked if the goddess Maera had visited Alicia and asked her to tell her everything she knew about this novel. The main thing is that the future where Ophelia was alive was the result of Alicia's death, and this option was already known to her. This future doesn't matter now, because Alicia is still alive, which means Ophelia's secrets are useless at this point. She asked the girl to leave the room because she had heard enough of what she wanted. The girl pointed to the front door, saying that she could hardly stand Ophelia's company as it was, so she should do her a favor and just leave. They were no longer a family, and all the ties that held them together were broken the day Ophelia decided to leave her and Alfred. The lady screamed. She was no longer the sickly and withdrawn girl who needed someone's care. So Ophelia had better get out of Loten's, because Alicia admitted that she never wants to see her again. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on the door, and the people on the other side of the room were worried whether everything was okay with the lady. The residents heard some noise in the room, so they discussed whether they needed to break down the door and check everything. Alicia wondered if Ophelia really had no idea what she was doing, but when she heard a knock on the door, she was clearly about to disappear again. She asked her friend to remember that she would always have someone who would do everything possible to make her happy. Ophelia disappeared as quickly as she appeared, and at that very second, the door opened and guards entered. They asked if the lady was hurt, but she did not answer, but only silently looked towards the open window. She saw a small magical light in her palm, and everything that happened was very strange. The lady opened her hand, and a small note appeared in it, and Ophelia had probably just handed it over. The guards reported that they heard a loud noise, so they immediately arrived to check on the lady's safety. It was clear from Alicia's furious face that she was clearly upset about something and very angry. She said that a robber tried to break into her, but she ran away as soon as he saw him. The guards decided that they absolutely had to send for people, but Alicia dissuaded them from doing so, since that girl would never return here again. The guard reported that a letter had arrived from Sir Nicholas Diaz and handed it over to the addressee. The girl opened the envelope and slowly began to read the contents of the letter, because she was no longer afraid of anything. She asked the guards to leave, as she had wanted to be alone for a long time, but each time someone interfered with her solitude. They wished Milady good night, and at last Alicia was left alone again in the dark room. The letter spoke of the fallen priest Nyx, imprisoned in the temple, and there was nothing new in it at all. Alicia threw the letter on the floor because she already knew everything that would happen next. She concentrated on her feelings, imagining how energy gathered in her palms and shimmered like a stream of light. Alicia still felt Ophelia's presence nearby, as if everything had happened just recently and there had been no long years of separation. She remembered well her words that there would always be someone who would do anything for her happiness, and they inspired support. Norman had been thinking for a long time about how to do something nice for Alicia, and he decided to collect a lot of purple flowers for her. But inside the basket, his attention was drawn to an unexpected inhabitant, a black kitten with large, shining eyes full of curiosity and hope. Norman wanted to give these flowers to Alicia, but fate decreed that another surprise awaited her. While pondering what to do, he noticed that the kitten was looking at him with such expectation that he could not refuse its charm. For some reason, this cute kitten reminded Norman of Alicia, and he felt that the baby was very similar to her. At that moment, all worries and fuss faded into the background, and Norman felt that this moment was real. Madame Stan approached the young man, and she had been looking for him everywhere for a long time. It turned out that they still hadn't finished the fittings, and the young men should go with her. He said that was probably enough dressing up for today, but in reality, he just wanted to know more about Lady Alicia's preferences. But their attention was drawn to a small, black, fluffy lump that meowed and asked to be petted. Looking into his eyes, Norman realized that this little black kitten, who might have once been lost, now had him as his protector and friend. Madame asked where Norman had found this furry miracle that was now purring on his hand. The kitten, as if understanding every word, arched and pressed itself against Norman, and its fur felt soft and warm to the touch. Madame asked the Norman if the kitten seemed very similar to Lady Alicia, and that she would probably quickly become attached to it. The lady didn't think that Norman liked animals, and was he really going to give this fluffy little bundle to Milady? Norman happily announced that she and Lady Alicia would raise him together, and that this cat would become their best friend. The fireworks display was about to start, and Norman was going to go get the girl. Madame Stan was surprised to see how tenderly and carefully the young man treated the pet he had found. And the words that Norman was going to raise the kitten together with the lady were surprising to her. That evening, Norman promised that they would watch the fireworks together, but on the way to her, the young man saw something strange. There was a carriage with harnessed horses standing on the street, and there were many strangers near it. The madam was indignant about how a carriage appeared here in the middle of the night, and really wanted to know the real reason for the guard's appearance. The young man whispered something in Madame's ear, and it seemed to be very important information. The head of the knights turned to Norman, and he suggested that they must have been sent by Lady Alicia herself. They did indeed come at her ladyship's command, but Norman was also involved. As it turned out, the girl asked the guards to escort Norman back to his estate. And this meant one thing: the young man needed to return to his family right now. 2 months later, a huge number of new changes took place at Melfont Manor. Alicia finally returned to her estate, and all the residents and servants were happy about the arrival of their mistress. Much had changed in her long absence from the Melfont estate, but most importantly, Alicia was glad to return to her home. She was met by her faithful servant, Erica, who was in charge during her mistress's absence. They went into the study, and the first thing Alicia asked was whether everything had been in order for such a long time. She was confident that Erica did her job well, and there were never any problems with her. Erica said that some important issues had accumulated since the lady's absence, but the most urgent problems had been resolved. The lady smiled a sincere smile, realizing that all other questions required the personal attention of the guild leader. In the lady's hands, Erica saw a note, and obviously it was something important. She assumed that this was the information, and all the answers should be sought in the fate of Calliope's sister. This must have had something to do with the future that Ophelia saw, and Erica promised to arrange a meeting at a time convenient for the lady. Erica immediately noticed that after her return, the lady became very silent and thoughtful. The maid reported that they had prepared everything according to the mistress's orders, and this concerned Sir Diaz. The young man was probably already on his way to his native estate, and Alicia said these words with particular sadness. She asked that she was just wondering if he was able to return safely to his family. At this time, the young man was already riding in a carriage back home, but for some reason he felt strange. There was a small black kitten lying in his arms, and the young man thought the lady had always been more than kind to him. Lady Alicia ordered Norman to be taken directly to the Diaz estate and provided the best guards. Madame Stan was also very sorry that the young man was leaving them, and she probably should have given the young man time to communicate the way he wanted. She handed Norman a letter from Alicia, which the girl had written before leaving for the Melfont estate. In the letter, she apologized for not being able to keep her promise and would like to express her full gratitude. She wanted to try to convey her gratitude in a few sincere words, and considered Norman a guest of the guild and only then her bodyguard, but he saved her life. The lady asked the guards to make sure that Norman's journey went smoothly because she would not have been able to return home alive if it were not for him. It might not have been enough to repay the boy for his services, but Alicia had asked that he be honored and sent back to his family, and it was the least she could do. In the letter, she wrote that she really hoped Norman's life would be filled with joy and happiness, and that is exactly what she wished for him. Norman read the letter on his way home, and every line seemed to warm his soul with warmth and sincerity. He felt disappointed because they had been together for so little time, and he still wanted to get to know Alicia better. These were happy moments that were made possible by the terms of the contract they signed, and the young man was afraid that without them, he and Alicia would be absolutely nothing to each other. Norman had strange mixed feelings, but after a while, the coachman announced that they had arrived at the Diaz estate. The last time he had been home was 10 years ago, and everything had probably changed here, but he knew that it had remained the same. The young man wondered what Alicia would do in his place, because she always gave wise advice. You can't change anything if you don't do anything, but you should always listen to your heart. Then she asked to meet her brother and apologize to him, and for the young man, this meant a lot. It had been 10 long years since Nicholas lost Norman, and it had been a time full of fear and doubt. But now they were together again, and Nicholas greeted his long-absent brother with incredibly happy eyes. He knew they had many questions ahead of them, but one thing was clear. Their bond, tested by time and magic, had only grown stronger. They exchanged glances, realizing that together they could overcome any difficulties. After all, standing before him was that same little Nicholas, who had now become a brave and intelligent young man. He rushed to his brother, and they hugged, not believing that they had finally met again after many years. Norman and Nicholas were overcome with emotion, and neither of them realized how much they were going through. Nicholas looked at his brother with eyes full of tears of joy and admitted that he had missed him incredibly these long years. The young man could not hold back his tears, and Norman tried to calm his brother, who was incredibly happy about the long-awaited meeting. It was the first time the servants of the Diaz estate had seen Sir Nicholas cry, for he had always been stern and reasonable. Usually people become more sentimental when they are about to die, but this was a completely different case. The brother's appearance had changed. His hair had become longer, and his eyes sparkled with brightness, as if he had endured more over the years than it might seem. It had been a week since Norman had been reunited with his family, and in a letter to Lady Alice he expressed his gratitude. Everything was as the girl said, and Norman's family welcomed him warmly, and no one said a bad word. The young man imagined that Alicia was probably up to her ears in the work that had accumulated during her absence, and he was interested to know how she was doing. Alicia expected to see order, but she was met with people who were undermining important work. Erica told me about a woman, a midwife who specialized in miscarriages, and her name was Madame Kruger. But she wasn't worried at all, because she knew that all the local residents and servants would support her. But the self-confident lady of the Melfont house now knew how to bring any task to completion. Norman wrote the letter with special care and was looking forward to their upcoming meeting, and the last line seemed to write itself. The young man didn't even expect that he would be able to write something like this, but his letter was truly sincere. Norman finally put the finishing touches to the letter, but he was overcome with strong doubts. For some reason, he was sure that he wouldn't even send this letter, but he still wanted to write it. Nicholas heard his brother sneezing again and suggested keeping the panther cub outside to prevent Norman from getting allergies. The young man looked at the little black kitten, and this creature clearly reminded him of someone. Norman didn't immediately understand why his brother was talking about a panther, but his brother insisted that he had simply overlooked something. The kitten had incredibly powerful paws and sharp claws, and was clearly a black panther cub. At this stage, the panther was indistinguishable from a kitten, and Norman clearly felt that he wanted to be with her. He carefully took the kitten in his arms, saying that he would never allow him to be thrown out the door, and the baby would live next to him. This evening, Nicholas came to tell me that he had been called to Bardat, and he did not want to leave his brother alone. Norman didn't expect to hear that he and his brother would have to be separated again so soon, but he was glad that his younger brother was speaking on behalf of the goddess, and was incredibly proud of Nicholas's achievements. Norman knew that Nicholas's mission had to come first, and that Nix had to be locked up, or else innocent people would get hurt, and that was his duty as a commander. Nicholas became enraged whenever he thought that his brother had suffered at the hands of the cruel villain Nix. The young man confessed that the villain had merely imprisoned him in timelessness, and that he had probably even been very lucky. The same could not be said for the others, for many people had died in captivity, sacrificed, and Nix was obliged to answer for his crimes. And if you think about it, Lady Alicia didn't just save him, she owed countless villagers their lives, because Nyx would have sacrificed them if she hadn't intervened. The young man believed that for this girl, he was just one of many people she met along the way. Nicholas recently received a letter with the Melfont seal, and he realized that it was about Alice. He reported that Alicia had said that she had never been able to thank the young man, and that people were coming to them to deliver a message. And upon hearing this news, Norman was overcome with intense excitement, which even made him feel dizzy. After all, Lady Alicia herself would soon arrive here, and he was stunned by such joyful news. He asked his brother again if he had said it was true that Mrs. Melfont was going to visit their estate. Nicholas saw that his brother was very surprised, but he didn't understand why it caused such a violent reaction in him. Alicia was the head of Romdak and should have shown up, but Nicholas saw his brother acting strangely. He noticed that the young man's face changed instantly as soon as he heard about Lady Melfont's imminent arrival. He asked if my lord was upset and shared the feeling that he had come to know the real Norman again. With each passing minute, Nicholas liked his brother more and more, and he was glad to feel a family connection again. At that moment, there was a knock at the door, announcing that it was time for my lord to leave, and that an important matter required no delay. Nicholas went off, accompanied by a guard, to resolve important issues, leaving his brother alone. He said that Jack would need to keep an eye on Ophelia, and this order was important. Norman wished his brother a safe journey and promised to chat as soon as he returned. A few days later, Norman saw through the window how cavalry with carriages was approaching the Diaz estate. He was expecting Lady Alicia to appear, and she must have been in one of these carriages. Suddenly, an unfamiliar young man burst through the door, surprising the young gentleman with his appearance. The young man greeted my lord loudly, and his name was Finn Weiss, and from today on he was introduced as a personal bodyguard. He was one of the famous Weiss brothers, the youngest, and there were many good rumors about him. Norman smiled pleasantly and said that he trusted and relied on his new responsible bodyguard. He extended his hand in greeting to Finn, who declared that it was a great honor for him to protect Norman's safety. But next time he said, "It is better for a young man to knock and not to fly into the office without knocking." Finn bowed low and apologized, promising it would never happen again. The young man asked how his friend Morton was doing, because he had heard that Jack had also recently become a knight. Finn said that Morton is now in charge of security for the entire kingdom, and Jack works as Sir Nicholas's bodyguard. The mere mention of his brothers made him cringe, and it was no surprise, since Finn's family was a strict disciplinarian. Norman asked the young man if he could run fast, but he didn't know how to admit that he was the slowest of his brothers. Finn stated enthusiastically that he considered himself more of a swordsman than a skilled runner. Norman smiled mysteriously and suggested that the young man conduct a small test together right now. Suddenly, the young man opened the window and jumped out of it, and Finn did not expect the young gentleman to do such a thing. The young man immediately ran to the window, but this was not at all how he had imagined his first day at work. Norman at this time was already flying down from the window using his magical abilities. The young man quickly landed and thought, "Lady Alicia seems cold, but she is always on the side of truth, and only thanks to her he returned to the right path." She shouldn't have thanked him, but on the contrary, the young man was sure that only he should thank her. Knight Finn had already run to Norman, declaring that he must guard him, and that the young man should not jump out of the window anymore. Norman said she wasn't here, but Finn had no idea who the gentleman was talking about. The young man was looking for the guild mistress, but Finn did not understand why she should be here, since this was a simple delegation with gifts. Norman thought Finn was probably right. Alicia had no reason to drive by, and Nicholas was probably just joking, and he bought into the stupid joke. Now Norman simply met humbly and knew that it was not at all out of gratitude. Only now did he realize that he loved with all his heart the brave and mysterious girl who taught him to be happy. Erica arrived at the mistress's office early in the morning to discuss important matters and issues. She said that Sir Norman might have escorted the girl to Katam, but that was only natural, considering what she had done for him. Erica had in mind rescuing the boy from his magical imprisonment, and she was absolutely right. Ophelia's power would not have been able to activate without Alicia's will, which is why they were able to escape Tantaros, but she would not have made it to Katam safely if it weren't for Norman. Alicia asked if Erica was trying to suppress the rumors about her and Norman that had clearly spread throughout the Empire. But rumors will always appear, and people will always discuss other people's lives no matter what they do. The lady understood that Erica was simply worried, but she was not at all concerned about the groundless gossip that the stupid aristocrats were spreading. She was rather worried about the rumors that Nyx and Lady Alicia Melfont had entered into a secret alliance, and many now believed so. Surely everything would be simpler if people knew that the suspected conspirator, Alicia, had escaped from Tantaros and sent a delegation with gifts to the Diaz estate, and that could immediately put an end to all the rumors. The lady said that a lady never pays for nothing, and this is probably already known to everyone. Her gaze suddenly stopped on the purple flowers of the Teresia, and looking at them, Alicia felt great faith in a happy future. Now these flowers reminded her not only of Ophelia, but were a symbol of her acquaintance with Norman. At this point, Alicia clearly felt that she had become too sentimental and tried to push away the overly sweet thoughts. But her mind still did not leave one young gentleman whom she saved from the magic lake. A warm, dark night was falling on the Dime estate, and Norman was still standing in the courtyard waiting for someone. He told Finn that he wanted to be alone, and surely the young man could go and rest. But Finn could not disobey the order, so he asked his lord to forgive him, because he was forced to protect him from any possible danger at any time of the day or night. Norman quietly asked if Finn thought Iago was still at large, or if there was other information about him. My lord really wanted to be left alone, and asked Finn to respect his decision if he was a man of honor. On the one hand, Finn really couldn't disobey the order, but on the other hand, he understood the feelings of his lord perfectly well. So he turned around and quietly announced that he would return to the barracks for training, but the young master should be careful. He did not do this because Milord ordered it. He simply respected his decision. Norman looked at the river, and his thoughts were carried away. It was deep and endless like his thoughts. Standing here, he couldn't help but think about his goals, desires, and what was truly important. Flashes of memories flashed through his mind, and he felt emotions, joy, sadness, nostalgia rising to the surface. The young man's attention was drawn to a mysterious purple light, and going down the stairs, he saw a huge field of those same purple flowers from which he had woven a wreath for Alicia. Lady Alicia had said that these flowers rarely grew in these parts, but now a huge field of magical flowers stretched out before the young man. It was actually the first time he saw a huge field of Teresia flowers in front of him, and it was amazing. Suddenly, Finn ran up to my lord again, probably unable to leave him alone. He came to report that there was no one in these hidden parts of the castle, and it was better not to go there. Finn insisted that it was his duty, and he could not leave my lord alone in an unsafe area. They heard a quiet rustling sound nearby, and it was likely that the young men were not alone here. Suddenly they noticed a silhouette in a black hood, and it was clearly a man who was also in the field of purple flowers. In the darkness, it was impossible to make out the mysterious man's face, but one thing was clear. He had incredibly blue eyes. Judging by her long hair, it was a girl, and she wanted to take off her hood and introduce herself. The lady removed her hood and confessed that they had finally met Mr. Norman. The young men clearly didn't expect to see anyone here at such a late hour, but Norman's anxiety quickly subsided when he saw the girl. Finn shouted that he didn't expect to see Lady Ophelia here, but he was very glad that it wasn't a robber. Recently, in a conversation, Nicholas admitted that he would not have been able to hold out for those long 10 years when his brother was not around if it were not for Ophelia. For him, this girl was the only faith in happiness and love, for which one could do a lot. Norman apologized, admitting that he should have recognized Ophelia right away, since Nicholas had talked a lot about her. Sweet Ophelia admitted in a tender voice that she, too, was incredibly happy to see her brother Nicholas. The girl laughed and apologized for the cloak, because she didn't want to scare anyone, and women on the run don't dare reveal themselves in public places. The young man asked if it was Ophelia who planted the Teresia flowers here, and she did not believe that Norman also knew their name. He said that a girl sold such flowers at the fair in Katam, and he heard that they were wildflowers growing in the Western Empire. But suddenly Norman confessed that some people use them to create beautiful wreaths, and Ophelia immediately remembered how she gave a woven wreath to Alicia. The girl, hearing this, could not contain her emotions and burst into tears, and apparently they have something to talk about. It all happened 10 years ago when Nicholas found Ophelia in the forest, lying unconscious on the ground. She was a fugitive wanted by Romdak, and her wanted photo was posted on every corner. That day, Nicholas asked her to do as he ordered, or the girl would rot in a cold and damp prison for the rest of her days. Then Ophelia revealed that she had survived Nyx's attack on the Melfont estate and lost her entire family. Nicholas thought that his brother's curse and the dark force that had consumed the estate came from the same source. It was a useful clue in the search for the truth, because cultists were already moving after Ophelia. Ophelia loudly declared that they wanted to attack Nyx's minions, and they definitely wanted to kill her. Ophelia tied Nicholas's hand to herself with a rope, and in an attempt to protect him, she came out in front of the villains, holding out a sharp dagger. As it turned out, they were united by a common enemy, and they were, in theory, carrying out the same mission. This mysterious day was special to me not only for Ophelia but also for young Nicholas. After all, it was this meeting that marked the beginning of their partnership in exterminating the cultists, and now they were fighting together against everyone. Norman and Finn listened attentively to Ophelia's story, which the girl told with particular emotion. Finn was outraged because he expected a love story, but it was more of a mysterious, exciting adventure. Norman decided to ask why the girl had dedicated her entire life to tracking down cultists. Ophelia admitted that she did everything for her and wanted to make amends for what she had to go through because of her. And Alicia Mefflont was the very reason why Ophelia had been suffering for the last 10 years. Ophelia hunted the cultists to get to the main culprit and publicly speak out against their atrocities, as well as for Alicia's safety. And Norman was sure that every flower was planted in the name of her dear friend, whom she tried to take care of even from a distance. Tiresias are said to bring good luck if they can be kept from dying within 7 days. So Ophelia carefully tended the local flowers to ensure that Alicia would have good luck in the future. Ophelia wasn't at all angry that Alicia had put a bounty on her head and had originally hoped for something less. This means that Ophelia knows everything, that her friend simply had no other choice because she had to do this. The girl carefully handed the young gentleman a purple flower, and the young man was so worried that he could not utter a word. He said that he thought Ophelia wanted to keep the flowers as far away as possible, and the Teresia flowers were incredibly beautiful. Ophelia laughed, confident that when you share with people, your luck always multiplies. So Ophelia gave the boy the purple flower and thus gave him a symbol and good luck so that he could share it with another. Here, under the castle bridge, unspoken feelings that had been kept under lock and key for so long were in full bloom. The young man took the flower in his hands with trepidation and promised that he would definitely do just that, because when you share with people, your luck multiplies. It was an incredibly hectic morning, and Alicia came to Erica with a document that she urgently needed to look at. It was a letter from Nicholas Diaz, and Erica began to read the first lines carefully. House Diaz was immensely grateful to Madame Melfont for her invaluable help, and Nicholas gave his word that they would definitely repay the girl for her favor. The line about invaluable help was especially intriguing because Alicia also needed support. Erica asked if it was true that this letter was written by the same Nicholas Diaz, who was widely known in all corners of the empire. They had seen each other often before, and at one meeting Alicia said that imprisonment of criminals was a heavy burden on the state treasury, and the possibility of another punishment would greatly reduce expenses. The girl tried to prove her truth to Nicholas, but the young man expressed his open protest. Nicholas had often countered the young lady's words when they had met at meetings before. Back then, he was the girl's headache because he was always against her during council visits. But that was far from all, and at the celebration of the founding of the empire, he also appeared in all his glory. Many ladies were outraged. Alicia does not want to catch the fugitive Ophelia, and she probably just doesn't care that she poses a threat to all the aristocrats. Alicia was outraged by the impudent behavior of the ladies of the court, but she knew she could put each of them in their place. She promised that very soon the scoundrel would appear before her in chains because she deserved it. Nicholas considered the girl's behavior too vulgar, but on the other hand, he understood her reaction. He was puzzled that the girl behaved like a fisherman's wife at a trading bazaar, but was in fact a respectable lady. Alicia was incredibly angry. Did Nicholas really just dare to call her a fisherman's wife? The girl's rage did not take long to come, and the next second she wanted to rush at Nicholas with loud hysterical screams. Then he was just lucky that Alicia didn't get to the young master's face and break his nose in front of everyone. Erica remembered, now that she thought about it, that too often the contents of Nicholas's glasses ended up on the young lady's dresses. Their relationship had never worked out, but finally Alicia's archenemy expressed gratitude, and it was a triumphant victory. But there was another small letter in the envelope which Lady Alicia had evidently overlooked. The envelope contained a Teresia flower, and from now on it was a symbol of new life and faith. They say that a Teresia that blooms for a whole week brings good luck. and Alicia was already familiar with this belief. This letter was from Norman, who wanted to keep up the age-old tradition and tell them that he had found a whole field of Teresia on their estate. Sharing always increases luck, and these flowers were waiting for him in a remote corner of the castle. He admitted that the flowers were beautiful and had now become a close symbol to him, reminding him of the kind-hearted Lady Alicia. Norman was incredibly happy to send the girl a flower, which he was able to keep for all 7 days. If the rumors about this magical purple flower are true, they are bound to meet again. In writing, Norman confessed that he was looking forward to that happy day and would always be attached to the young lady with his heart and soul. Alicia was surprised. There really is a field of purple flowers in the Diaz estate, which means Ophelia is hiding there. The girl thought for a moment and asked Erica if she thought luck would visit her in the future, and the maid was sure that Milady would succeed. She never doubted for a second that Mrs. Alicia had a good heart, and that good people always had good luck. But suddenly their conversation was interrupted, and it became obvious that there was someone behind the office door. It was a messenger, and Alicia wondered if the young man was in no hurry. He bowed low and announced, "Sir Philip Morflock has finally sent his engagement ring to Lady Alice." And now Mrs. Melfont clearly felt that luck would definitely smile on her, but she needed to want it badly. She clenched her fist and offered to look at the ring, and she really hoped that Morflock should now be happy if it was the same ring that she herself had paid for, becoming the self-confident mistress of the Melfont house. In one of the imperial cities, the people were solemnly celebrating the day of the founding of the empire, and after 10 painful years, the time had finally come.